Chapter 225. It was a huge rooster, about 1.5 meters tall. Its whole body was covered in fiery red feathers, and its bright red comb was very dazzling in the sun. When it flapped its wings, golden red flames jumped up and swirled around them. Its small black eyes stared straight at Meg as if it was full of hostility. When Meg first saw it, he thought it was a cross between a rooster and an ostrich. It must be the legendary turkey. A living magical beast was indeed different from a chicken leg in the refrigerator. The fiery smell hit him in the face. He thought he would have to move to another place, but he didn't expect this guy to hide behind a rock and jump out by itself. Meg suddenly stood up, shielded Amy behind him, and took 5 or 6 steps back. Wow, what a big rooster. Should we roast it or steam it? Amy's eyes widened. She swallowed her saliva as she looked at the turkey with stars in her eyes. Coo. The turkey seemed to feel a great threat. It looked at Amy in horror. Although it was small, it gave off a feeling that it couldn't be provoked. Braised in yellow is better. Meg couldn't help but laugh. For a little foodie, magical beasts were just ingredients. Meg handed Ugly Duckling to Amy in the small bag and said seriously, "Amy, stand aside and wait for me to take care of it." "Okay, father, do your best." "Is braised chicken really that good? I want to eat it so much," Amy said expectantly, holding Ugly Duckling in her arms. Ugly Duckling just raised its eyelids and glanced at the turkey. Then it went back to sleep in Amy's arms as if it didn't have any energy at all. Ooh. The turkey raised its neck and squawked again. Its voice was very impactful. It turned to stare at Meg with contempt and provocation. It flapped its wings a few times, and balls of flames rose and condensed on its wings. It seemed to be preparing a big move. Ha! Isn't that the sound of a turkey? Did someone find a turkey on the western slope? At the foot of the mountain, many people looked towards the west side of the mountain with some surprise. Generally speaking, there were very few magic beasts on the west side of the mountain. I remember there was a pretty boy who carried a little girl up the mountain. Could it be that they met? That's bad. The fighting strength of a fire chicken is above average among level 1 magical beasts, especially that flame. If an ordinary person is burned by it, I'm afraid they will be turned into charcoal. That man is too unreliable. Could it be that he wants to take the little girl to the hot spring? We're in danger now. Many people were checking and sorting out the spoils of war at the exit of the Thorns Ridge. Previously, when they saw Meg carrying Amy up the mountain, they also started discussing spiritedly. To experienced mercenaries, a fiery bird was naturally nothing, but to rookie mercenaries, a fiery bird was enough to make them scratch their heads and even give up their lives. However, they were already somewhat accustomed to matters of life and death. They might feel pity, but they didn't have the leisure to run up the mountain to confirm the safety of 2 strangers. Are you saying that there was a man in gray clothes carrying a little girl in a wizard robe up the mountain? Guy, who had just passed by on his horse, stopped and asked when he heard their conversation. He later went to take on several other missions. At his level, he could take on several missions at the same time. If he was lucky, he might be able to complete several missions in a day. That's right. Not much time has passed since they went up the mountain. The sound of a fiery bird can be heard. I don't know who it is. A middle-aged mercenary nodded. A fiery bird. Damn it. Guy's expression suddenly became anxious. He dismounted his horse, tied the reins to a nearby tree, and ran up the mountain with a long black javelin and a bow. That half-elf girl was quite cute. His little granddaughter was about the same age as her. When she wasn't doing missions, she would pester him to play games at home every day. His son was also a mercenary, but he never thought of bringing his little girl to Stranglethorn Vale to play. She should be at the age where she should go to school. Wouldn't that be like bringing a child blindly? He could still hear the fiery bird crowing. Hopefully, he could make it in time. He quickened his pace. Meg looked at the fiery bird standing on a big rock and took a few steps to the left with his sword. This was the first time he faced a fiery bird, but he didn't feel the slightest bit of fear. Instead, he felt a little excited. Yes. It was the feeling of excitement. His heart was beating faster and his blood was flowing faster, but it was definitely not because of fear. It was because his body was thirsting for battle, a long-awaited battle to his heart's content. I've wronged you. Meg looked at his hand and silently said in his heart. His body had almost reached the limit of human strength, but he couldn't even lift a sword in the past 3 years. This was probably the feeling of a bright pearl covered in dust. But now, it was as if he was unlocking the first layer of the seal on his body. He could once again hold his sword and fight. A battle intent rose from the bottom of his heart. It was a strange yet familiar feeling. Scenes of previous battles flashed through his mind. Those were the most precious battle experiences. Oh! The fiery bird let out a sharp cry and flapped its wings. The 6 fireballs condensed on its wings suddenly flew towards Meg. It seemed that the fiery bird was ready to burn Meg to death. The basketball-sized fireballs flew over and the temperature rose a lot. This was the fiery bird's innate ability. If it couldn't be avoided, then even a knight's armor would be melted. This was also the reason why the fiery bird could squeeze into the upper middle level among level 1 fiery birds. If it's only to this extent, then it's not enough. Meg raised the corner of his mouth and slightly bent his legs. His steps were light, and his body easily jumped 3 meters away. The 6 roaring fireballs smashed into the ground where Meg was originally standing, one after another, creating a deep pit. The soil and stones on the edge were even melted. Father is so powerful. Come on. Come on. Amy clapped her small hands and shouted happily. The fiery bird also seemed a little annoyed that it couldn't hit its target. However, the fiery bird obviously couldn't release the fiery bird indefinitely, so it flapped its wings and swooped down towards Meg like an eagle. Its pair of sharp claws glowed with a cold light. It seemed that it intended to directly attack Meg with its body. Meg narrowed his eyes slightly. The fiery bird's wingspan was more than 2 meters. Its legs were powerful and its black claws were like black knives. Meg knew better than anyone how hard the fiery bird's bones were. An ordinary kitchen knife couldn't cut it. Such sharp claws could easily break a knight's armor and crush a person's head. Chapter 226. The results of the 4 Emperors and 1 Emperor essay competition were out. Daddy Nanny's Otherworld restaurant had successfully reached the top of the original fantasy category and obtained a spot as one of the 4 Emperors. Thank you very much for everyone's support. Qingyu would like to thank you. Here the prize belongs to Daddy Nanny's restaurant, and the glory belongs to everyone. It was only because of your support that I was able to obtain this prize. Thank you very much. Also, thank you to Qidian for allowing my dream from 10 years ago to finally come true. It proved that I could rely on writing to make a living. Thank you to Editor-in-Chief Wakaba for supporting me along the way. Whether it was One Punch or the restaurant, she had given me a lot of support and help. Thank you to Editor-in-Chief Mungbin and the editorial team for their affirmation. I'm really happy today. It's good to have a dream. The feeling of realizing my dream step by step through my own hard work is also very good. Finally, I'd like to focus on thanking my comrade Salted Fish. She was the one who wrote One Punch's acceptance speech, and Daddy Nanny wrote it after meeting her. She was the one who accompanied him when it went up for sale. The female clothing was in her hands. If I could write for my entire life, it would probably be the luckiest thing. Thank you all. That's right, you're the original subscribers. Don't blindly substitute others, that's all. Chapter 227. Host, please don't slander the system. I'm definitely not such a system. The system retorted solemnly. At the same time, it said seriously, out of consideration for the host's safety, the system will enter real-time command mode to provide the host with the most accurate analysis. I can tell the host with certainty that the level 3 bronze wild boar's frontal charge has reached a speed of 300 km per hour, and it's still accelerating. You can't stop it. Nonsense, I know I can't stop it. Meg looked at the wild boar charging at him like a heavy truck. He wasn't going to become arrogant just because he killed a chicken. He didn't care about Amy's gluttonous comment for the time being. He picked her up one by one and placed her on the big rock next to the hot spring. The rock was as tall as a person and more than 3 meters thick. It was connected to the mountain. If the wild boar wasn't crazy, it wouldn't use its head to hit the rock. However, Meg was worried that it would jump up. Even a cornered dog would jump over a wall, let alone a wild boar. Meg reached out and untied Amy's little cloak. He patted her head and said seriously, Amy, stay there and don't move. Wait for me to lure this big wild boar away. Okay. Amy nodded obediently. However, she soon asked with a conflicted expression, But if we lure it away, won't we not be able to eat delicious wild boar meat tonight? We can go buy some. Although the situation was tense, Meg couldn't help but laugh. He was obviously no match for this level 3 magic beast. Although Amy could use fireball, such a small fireball would probably only cause the wild boar to lose a few hairs. It might even enrage the wild boar and make Amy its target. Meg didn't want to take this risk. System, if I die, no one will buy your food. Hurry up and call for backup. Any aerial attack will do. Meg shouted in his mind as he ran to the side with his red cloak in one hand and his sword in the other. The bronze wild boar's attack on red targets is increased tenfold. Host, are you sure you want to use yourself as bait? It has already locked onto you, and its speed is still increasing. 335. 345. 350. The system's voice gradually increased in volume. Support. I want reinforcements. Meg couldn't help but complain. The system was full of nonsense. Anyone could see that the wild boar charging towards him with scarlet eyes was very ferocious. Did he really have to fight it to the death in Stranglethorn Vale's pig fighting tournament? Although he felt that his body was light and agile, and that he was able to dodge nimbly, looking at the ferocious wild boar, Meg felt that it was more likely that he would end up being eaten by the boar. System, you said that if I brought Amy here, the chances of survival would be 100%. What about now? Meg continued to ask as he ran towards the cliff on the right. If you insist on not letting her attack, your survival rate will be 0%. The system's cold voice sounded. Father, do your best. You can do it. Meg turned around and looked at Amy, who was standing on the rock and twisting her body to cheer him on. Ugly Duckling lay lazily on the rock, and didn't even look at the ferocious bronze wild boar. It wasn't interested at all. Will it really work? Meg was a little doubtful. The wild boar was already 50 meters away, and he was still some distance away from the cliff. It was too late for him to reach it. Come on, let me see how strong this third-tier magic beast is. Meg immediately stopped in his tracks. The black wild boar the size of an elephant charged straight at him, kicking up clouds of black dust. The thorns that were as thick as a thumb were trampled into pieces, and couldn't stop it at all. The ground trembled, and small rocks rolled down the mountain. His heart was beating wildly, and his hand holding the long sword slowly tightened. However, Meg's expression became extraordinarily calm. He pointed the long sword in his hand at an angle, and narrowed his eyes slightly. Lord Father is the most powerful. Little Piggy definitely can't beat Father. Amy stood on the rock and waved her little hands. She looked at the wild boar charging at Meg with wide eyes, and her little face was full of confidence. The system had awakened the dormant cells with electric shocks, and at the same time, it had also awakened some things that Meg could do easily before, such as jumping several meters high. The wild boar rushed at him with a gust of wind that hurt his face. There was sand and thorns everywhere, covering the sky and the earth. Meg jumped 3 meters and narrowly avoided the wild boar's head-on collision. His body turned 180 degrees, and he reversed the long sword in his hand and stabbed it down. Ding! The long sword that had easily penetrated the throat of the turkey seemed to have stabbed into an iron plate. It had only pierced less than 10 centimeters into the throat of the turkey. After piercing into the throat of the turkey, the sword was directly clamped. The powerful and terrible inertia almost threw him forward. He turned his wrist and forcibly pulled back the sword. However, he only managed to cut a small hole in the back of the wild boar and cut off a dozen small finger-sized hairs. Meg staggered to the ground, and he barely stood still with the long sword in his hand behind him. His hand holding the long sword felt a little sticky, and the skin between his thumb and forefinger was split, with some blood oozing out. A third-level magical beast is really different. Meg raised his eyebrows. The wound on his hand didn't hurt, but his strength limited his ability to kill the wild boar. It should be said that he really couldn't beat it. He couldn't even break its defense. Killing this wild boar was an impossible task for him. System, can you lend me 1 physical strength point for 5 seconds? Meg asked in his heart. He only needed 1 point, and he was sure that he could easily kill this wild boar. If it's 1 point, the amount of electricity that needs to go through the host's body may be relatively large, and the duration will be longer. Are you sure you want to choose the option now? The system's voice sounded. It's too late. Meg looked at the wild boar that slammed on the brakes, dragging 2 exaggerated traces on the ground, and then turned around to stare at him again. His chest violently rose and fell. With his current physical strength, performing such a difficult action just now consumed a lot of his energy. The host doesn't have the authority to obtain 1 physical strength point. The system calmly responded. Roar! The bronze-skinned wild boar stomped on the ground with its hind legs. The wound on its back hurt, and its eyes became even redder as it stared at Meg. Its 4 hooves stomped on the ground, and it charged toward Meg again. Although it was going up the slope, and its body looked fat and clumsy, its speed was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, its speed had increased to over 100 kilometers per hour, and it once again charged toward Meg. Are you crazy? Meg turned around and ran towards a small tree at the side. He stepped on the tree trunk and used the force to leap up. Once again, he narrowly avoided the wild boar before it crashed into the small tree. He bent his legs slightly to reduce the momentum. His movements looked relaxed, but only he knew that his strength was rapidly depleting. Father, please. Amy's gaze fell on Meg's bleeding right hand, and her cheerful voice came to an abrupt halt. Her expression suddenly became angry. She stretched out her hands, and a bluish-purple flame rose from her hands, suddenly condensing into a small fireball. She looked angrily at the wild boar that turned around and said, Little Piggy, although Father can easily defeat you, I've decided to roast you now. Chapter 228. Guy looked a bit gloomy. As an experienced hunter, he could tell that the bronze wild boar had been completely infuriated from its roar. Even he had to stay away from a berserk bronze wild boar in this kind of terrain. As a third-level knight, he had always maintained a strong body and a cautious attitude even though he was almost 50 years old. He had never made a mistake in his 20 years of mercenary career. However, he really didn't want anything to happen to the little half-elf girl today. Maybe it was because she was too cute when she looked up at the magic crystal, or maybe it was because his granddaughter had a good half-elf friend in school. They were about the same age, so they should grow up happily. Therefore, even though he might be in danger and become the bronze-skinned wild boar's new target, he still wanted to go up and take a look. Maybe there was still a glimmer of hope. That kid is so unreliable. How dare he bring his own daughter to this kind of place? Guy was so angry that he quickened his pace. It sounded like he was getting closer. The veins on his hand that was holding the black javelin were bulging. The bottom of the hill was the most disadvantageous place to deal with the bronze-skinned wild boar. He only had one chance. If he couldn't hit the fatal spot, his 20 years of mercenary career would be over. No one could outrun a berserk bronze-skinned wild boar on a downhill hill. With a press of his hand, Guy nimbly jumped onto a rock and took a step forward with his left foot. His right hand and body that was holding the javelin bent backwards like a flexible longbow, and almost instantly, he was in the best position to throw the javelin. Momentum, power, accuracy. All of them were concentrated on the javelin. He only had one chance. Then, he saw something that he would never forget for the rest of his life. The little half-elf girl in a black dress was standing on a charred rock. She threw a fireball at the bronze-skinned wild boar that was charging at her. The blue-purple fireball was only the size of a child's fist. Compared to the wild boar that was speeding up, it was like a bubble that a child spat out. It didn't look threatening at all. Meg, who was standing there with a sword in his hand, was also stunned. He didn't move at all and didn't know how to dodge. Then, the small fireball landed on the bronze-skinned wild boar's head. Boom! With a loud explosion, the fist-sized fireball suddenly exploded. At the same time, the bluish-purple flames exploded, instantly wrapping around the bronze wild boar. The loud sound and the resulting shockwave caused the ground to sink by more than 10 centimeters, causing the ground to shake. The charging bronze wild boar seemed to have been hit in the face by a heavy hammer. Its body stopped almost instantly, and its ferocious head was blown out of shape. The purplish-blue flames swept past, and the black fur on his body, which was as thick as a pinky finger, was all set ablaze. The bronze pigskin that had a metallic luster turned golden red in an instant, as if it had been melted. After a moment of silence, the bronze wild boar let out an extremely tragic cry. Its entire body was on fire, and it madly turned around and ran up the mountain. However, it only ran for a few dozen meters before collapsing to the ground. After twitching a few times, it stopped breathing completely. The air was filled with the aroma of roasted pig. This. How is this possible? A 4-year-old third-level magician. Guy had witnessed everything with his own eyes, and his lips were trembling. His shock was indescribable. It wasn't that he hadn't seen more powerful magic casters before, but this little half-elf girl was simply too young. If news of a 4-year-old third-level magic caster were to spread, the entire Norland continent would be in an uproar. The last prodigy magic caster to shake the entire continent was Princess Irina of the Elven race. She was born with an affinity for magic, and became a first-level magic caster at the age of 3. When she was 5, she was already a third-level magic caster. After that, she became a 10th-tier great magic caster at the age of 26. Her aptitude was unmatched among the younger generation, and she dominated the entire world. With the Elven race's lifespan of at least 800 years, no one knew what heights she would reach in the future. Even the Elven Queen had taken over 40 years to become a 10th-tier great magic caster. However, this little half-elf girl was already able to easily cast a spell that was comparable to the full-force attack of a third-tier magic caster. Her aptitude was perhaps even greater than that of the elven princess. She was bound to become a dazzling star in the magic world. Perhaps she could even reach the same heights as the elven princess, and become an unprecedented half-elf great magic caster. Looks like I was overthinking things. They came prepared. It's just that the little girl was the one protecting them. Guy glanced at the golden-brown roasted copper boar, and sheathed his javelin with an awkward expression. Do they have to be so cruel? Before the explosion occurred, Mag had already retreated a few meters with the system's warning, but he was still almost thrown into the hot spring by the shockwave. He was also dumbstruck as he stared at the bronze wild boar that had already turned into a golden roast pig. He had always known that Amy was a prodigy. Otherwise, the two great magic casters, Crassus and Julian, wouldn't have fought over Amy as their disciple. However, when did the cute little fireball in Amy's hand become so powerful? Although it had burned Sargeras and Crassus, it was only burning. However, the fireball that had just exploded was no less powerful than a small artillery shell. System, what you said about the 100% survival rate makes a lot of sense. It was a wise decision to bring Amy along. Thank goodness I didn't buy your equipment, Meg said in his heart. If you buy the system's equipment, the system will give you a life accident insurance policy. If something happens to the host, the system will also compensate your family generously, the system retorted. Should I be happy? Meg couldn't help but roll his eyes internally. He stabbed his long sword into the ground, walked over to the large rock, and opened his arms to Amy with a smile. Amy, you're the best. You've helped Father a lot today. Come on down. But... Amy looked at Meg's blood-stained right hand, and worriedly said, Father, your hand must be hurting, right? Stupid pig, it made you bleed, so I roasted it. That way, it wouldn't run around. Father is fine. It's just a small wound. It doesn't hurt. Meg looked at Amy's worried expression, and a warm feeling welled up in his heart. He shook his head with a smile, and pulled out a gray handkerchief from his pocket before wrapping it around his right hand. It was just a small wound, so it really wasn't a big deal. He reached out and carried both Amy and Ugly Duckling down. Then let me blow on it for you. It won't hurt anymore after I blow on it. Amy was still worried, and she gently blew on his hand with an adorable expression on her face. It really didn't hurt anymore. Meg nodded with an elated expression. He stroked Amy's hair with his left hand with a smile before turning to Guy, who was standing nearby. Chapter 229. At the entrance of Amy's, all of the customers left in disappointment, leaving behind a small mountain of razor blades. Aisha, Mr. Mack and Amy aren't here, so the restaurant might not be open for business today, Yabamiya said in a resigned manner as she peered into the restaurant through the glass window. Yeah. Sally was wearing a white cheongsam with blue trim, and she was also a little disappointed as she looked at the empty restaurant. But you're really beautiful today, this dress suits you so well. Yabamiya turned around to look at her with an entranced expression. Sally's pristine white dress paired with her striking blue eyes made her appear even more elegant, and she was a stunning beauty to behold. Thank you. Sally nodded slightly at the sight of Yabamiya's sincere expression. She was a little embarrassed as she tucked away her legs, but there was also an unconcealable joy in her eyes. This dress was indeed very special, it was a style that she had never seen before. Unlike the wide hemlines of normal dresses, this dress fit her body better, and there was only a slit at the very bottom to accentuate her slender legs. Porcelain white and cyan blue intersected. The cold tone made her already snow-white skin even whiter and colder. She didn't know what material the dress was made from, but it seemed to be made from silk. However, even the silk produced in the wind forest wasn't as smooth and supple as this dress. Even though it fit her body perfectly, it didn't allow her to move at all. She even felt like she could walk through the wind forest in this dress and walk between the branches of the trees. Of course, what was even more amazing to her was that this dress fit her perfectly, as if it had been tailor-made for her. Regardless of whether it was the length of the dress or the width of her shoulders, there was not the slightest bit of deviation or excess. Even that part was exactly the same. There was no way that Meg could have just casually given such a fitting dress to her. Could it be that he had personally designed 2 dresses for her in that short period of time? And 2 pairs of shoes. But at that time, he didn't even ask for her measurements. Could it be that he was able to determine all her measurements just by looking? However, the dress she wore yesterday was actually quite loose, so it was impossible to see her waist, let alone her breasts. Thinking of this, Sally could not help but blush. Could it be that he had some kind of ability that allowed him to see through clothes or scan them? Mr. Mac is really a genius. Not only is the food delicious, but the clothes he chose are also very nice. Yabamiya was completely oblivious to the change in Sally's expression. She then turned to Sally and asked, "By the way, have you had breakfast yet, Aisha?" Sally was stunned. She shook her head and said, "Not yet." Yesterday, Meg had told her that she would get 1,200 yuan worth of food every day. Therefore, she wanted to have a plate of Yangzhou fried rice in the restaurant this morning, and nothing else. She had already told the owner of Gaia Hotel that she would continue to stay there. After the restaurant closed in the morning, she would go back to clean the hotel. After lunch, she would go back to take care of the quilts. She would work 2 jobs at the same time. Then you must be starving. Why don't I take you to a place for breakfast? Although it's not as good as Mr. Mac's, it's clean and cheap. I think you'll get used to it, Yabamiya said with a smile. Okay, thank you. Sally looked at Yabamiya's energetic smile and felt her mood lighten up. She nodded with a smile. You're right. With Mr. Mac's looks and genius cooking skills, not many women can resist him. I don't think he would do something like that. Sally thought to herself. If Meg told her, if you follow him, you can eat tofu pudding for free for the rest of your life, and you can eat 2 servings of tofu pudding at a time. That would be a very difficult question. No. Absolutely not. Sally quickly shook her head to get rid of the hesitation in her mind. It was one thing to lose one's dream, but how could one lose one's own life? She would never allow such a thing to happen. Let's go. Maybe we can come back at noon. Yabamiya led the way. Noon. Sally looked at the notice on the door again. The words were thin and long, but they didn't lose their sharpness or aggressiveness. It was similar to Mr. Mac's personality. She quickened her steps and caught up with Yabamiya. Meg had just noticed the middle-aged man who suddenly appeared. He was tall and big, wearing a black shirt and a tiger-skin vest. He looked to be in his 50s. His skin was reddish-black due to years of exposure to the sun, and he looked very energetic. After he jumped onto the rock, he turned around and prepared to throw the javelin in his hand. He only stopped when he saw Amy turn the bronze wild boar into a roasted pig with a fireball. This middle-aged man was the one who reminded Meg not to bring Amy out of the city when they were in the guild. His fearless expression touched Meg's heart. Without absolute strength, even an experienced hunter wouldn't choose to attack a berserk bronze wild boar downhill. This middle-aged man, whom Garen had only met once, was preparing to attack the bronze wild boar, perhaps because he was worried about Garen and his daughter's safety. Ahem, I just accepted a quest to kill a bronze wild boar. I heard the noise and came up to take a look. Since you've already killed it, it's fine. Guy put down the javelin in his hand awkwardly. Since the little girl was so strong, of course he didn't want to tell her that he had rushed up in a hurry. He didn't do anything anyway, so he just left naturally. So you're here for this big boar? Then she looked up at Mag and said, Father, I don't think the two of us can finish this big pig. Can we ask Grandpa Tiger to eat it with us? Mag nodded. Grandpa didn't come here for the roasted pig. Besides, although this boar was roasted by Amy, it can't be eaten. Raw meat is inedible, and it was overcooked for a short time. It's probably not cooked yet. Meg smiled and stroked Amy's hair. He looked at Guy and said, Hello, I'm Meg. I'm sorry to have made you come here for nothing. Haha, I'm Guy. It's good that you're fine. This big boar hasn't appeared on the western slope for many years. You're in luck. However, the ingredient board requires a whole fresh bronze wild boar, and this one doesn't meet the requirements. But this is an old boar, and the color of its tusks is very good. People often buy it in the animal bones section, so you should be able to get a good reward. Guy waved his hand and laughed heartily. This boar wasn't his target in the first place, so there was nothing to be disappointed about. Chapter 230. System, can I make it? Meg asked internally at the sight of the expectant Amy. Well. The system paused momentarily before replying in an apologetic voice, I really can't. It's not like I'm not paying. Meg was a little surprised that the system, which had always claimed to be omnipotent, was backing down. Wands are items that defy the principles of science. They stimulate one's body's latent potential, and then use the wand as a medium to unleash magic. They can even open spatial doors. This is an ability that can't be explained by science. The problems that the system can solve at its current level are all based on scientific research and reasoning. I'm not involved in things like magic yet. The system's voice was tinged with a hint of resignation as it continued, to put it simply, I can't make it. Cash? Meg asked again. The system can customize wands according to your requirements, but the wands that the system can make will only be semi-finished products. In the end, you have to inscribe magic patterns onto the wand. This step can only be accomplished by a true magic caster, and it would be best if the wand's attributes corresponded to the magic casters. The system's voice was filled with indignation. I see. Then I won't trouble you, I'll just get Amy's two masters to do it for me. A smile appeared on Meg's face. He had almost forgotten about Amy's two 10th-tier magic casters. They should be more enthusiastic about wands than he was. Alright, then I'll give you one as a wand. Go to school tomorrow and get Teacher Crassus to make one for you. Meg nodded with a smile before turning to Guy with a smile, and asking, Uncle Guy, these tusks have to be sold in pairs to be sold for a good price, right? That's right. A pair of tusks of this quality can sell for at least 60 gold coins, but if you sell them individually, you'll probably only be able to sell them for 20 gold coins. Guy nodded in response. The most precious part of the copper-skinned wild boar was its tusks, followed by the copper skin that could be made into soft armor. However, in terms of price, the 2,000 to 3,000 caddies of copper-skinned wild boar meat could be sold for the most money. In the market, it was at least 20 copper coins per caddy. If they sold it for half the price, they could still get 200 to 300 gold coins. However, the copper skin of the wild boar that Meg and the others had killed had almost melted away. Even if the meat was half-cooked, no one dared to take it. All that was left was a pair of tusks. This was also why most restaurants would state that they could not use magic to kill the copper skin wild boar when they put a bounty on it. This was because there was no guarantee that there would be something in the body of a wild boar killed by a magician. The restaurant could not afford such a joke. I see. Meg nodded in response. A pair of tusks from a third-tier magic beast like this could only be sold for 60 gold coins. As expected, money was not easy to make. They had worked so hard and almost lost their lives to kill that wild boar. In the end, they would have been better off making 30 Rugiamos at home. He didn't use his sword. Instead, he went over and broke off the tusks. The meat was still quite well roasted, and the 2 tusks were as thick as a child's arm and over half a meter long. They were still a little hot to the touch and a little heavy. The material was similar to that of ivory. It was as white as jade and had a very smooth surface. There were no impurities at all, and each of the tusks weighed close to 5 kilograms. "Father, give them to me." Amy's eyes lit up as she spread open her arms toward Meg. "One is enough to make a magic wand." Meg placed the tusks on the ground and had Amy hold on to the tip. It would be too heavy if he handed it directly to her. "But we have 2 of them." Amy looked at the other tusk in Meg's hand. "Uncle Guy, I'll give this tusk to you. It's not convenient for us to take it back with us, but 1 is enough." Meg turned to Guy with a smile. He had a good impression of this kind-hearted uncle. If Amy's fireball hadn't killed the bronze wild boar, then his timely arrival could have saved their lives. For a person whom he had met by chance to do this much, he felt that this person was a friend worth making. "You're giving it to me." Guy turned to Meg with a hint of surprise on his face. He then waved his hand with a smile and said, "No need. My target today is the big boar. Perhaps I'll be able to get 2 of them myself. Just a small token of my appreciation. Think of it as making a friend. I opened a restaurant on the westernmost side of the Aden Square. Come and have a seat if you have time." Meg smiled as he handed the tusks to Guy. A turkey, a pig's tusk, and Amy on his back, he really couldn't take them away. "Okay, then I won't stand on ceremony. My granddaughter also wants a magic staff." Guy took the pig's tusk and rummaged around in his small bag. He took out a thumb-sized purple crystal ball and handed it to Amy with a smile, saying, "This is the eye of a level 2 magic beast, purple-striped eagle. It is said that purple-striped eagles can see prey up to 50 kilometers away. There is a pair in total. I originally planned to give one to my granddaughter as a birthday present, but I don't know what to do with this one, so I'll give it to you." "Wow, it's purple. It's so beautiful." "Thank you, Grandpa Tiger." Amy took the ball and looked at it before speaking happily. "You're welcome." Guy laughed heartily. He was in a good mood. He put the pig's tusk next to the quiver at his waist and looked at Meg, saying, "Then rest up and go down the mountain as soon as possible. Although this is the periphery of Thorn's Ridge, but as mercenaries continue to enter Stranglethorn Vale, there are still some magic beasts that are scared out of their wits. It's not safe here." "Okay, we'll go down the mountain in a moment." Meg nodded with a smile. "Goodbye, little Mississippi." Guy waved at Amy and walked down the mountain with the javelin in hand. His hunt had just begun. "Goodbye, Grandpa Tiger." Amy waved her hand. Her other hand was still holding the eagle's eye and looking around. Suddenly, she said in pleasant surprise, "Father, I see a bird resting on a tree far, far away. It's still combing its feathers." Meg was surprised. "Look, it's really there." Amy handed the eagle's eye to Meg. Meg took it and looked at it with narrowed eyes. Through the light purple eye, he could see a 7-spotted ladybug rolling on a leaf. Even the small black dots on it could be clearly seen. Meg moved left and right, then put down the pearl and looked into the distance. He asked inwardly, "System, how far can this eagle's eye see?" "The limit is 15 kilometers. Because it can't be focused, it can only see things 15 kilometers away." The system replied. That's a bit useless, isn't it? Meg raised his eyebrows. After all, no enemy would stay motionless 15 kilometers away. Magic might be able to reactivate the eagle's eye. If it can be focused, it will become a miniature high-powered telescope. The system answered. Chapter 231. Why is it so quiet all of a sudden? That explosion seemed to have come from the top of the mountain. Could it be that there's a powerful magician up there? Most likely. That father and daughter pair are quite lucky. Yeah, but to be able to kill a bronze-skinned wild boar so quickly, he must be at least a fourth-tier magician, right? And he's still loitering around the perimeter. Did he go up the mountain to soak in the hot springs? The mercenaries at the foot of the mountain looked up in bewilderment. After the explosion, everything returned to normal. The bronze-skinned wild boar seemed to have died, so there was no need to retreat in a hurry. Look, it's that hunter. He seems to have an extra pig tooth on his waist, right? Soon, everyone saw a guy coming down the mountain. Their eyes all fell on the pig tooth on his waist. Guy ignored their gazes. Naturally, he wouldn't take the initiative to tell them what happened on the mountain. He led his horse to the entrance of Stranglethorn Vale. With a 4-year-old daughter who was a third-tier magician, he didn't believe that Meg was just a restaurant owner. Of course, but we have to get ready to go down the mountain. It's too dangerous here. Meg nodded with a smile. He glanced at his injured right hand and hesitated for a moment. System, I need a first aid kit for treating wounds. This system is a proper god of cookery system. I don't provide any medical services. Please conduct yourself with dignity. The system's voice sounded quite serious and dignified. Cash. Meg pursed his lips and patted his satchel. The sound of gold coins clinking against each other could be heard. Esteemed host, this system has prepared the most practical home travel kit for you. The most convenient. One first aid kit. It contains alcohol, cotton, iodine, masks, gauze, scissors, scalpels. The system's voice suddenly became flattering. I only want the iodine and gauze. How much? Meg calmly interrupted. Host, these are all necessities for home travel. It's enough to support a small surgery. It's definitely a bargain. If you miss today, you'll have to wait another year. The system couldn't help but raise its voice. System, when you want to eat watermelon, will you buy a watermelon plot first? Meg mocked coldly. The system doesn't eat watermelons, but if you want to, the system has already selected the best place to grow watermelons on the Norland continent. As long as the host opens a watermelon-related recipe, the system will immediately develop and modify it to ensure that it will grow the best watermelons on the entire continent. The system replied with a serious expression. Meg's sarcastic words had been forcefully diverted by the system. Well, it was right. If he were to say something like this to a system that was planting vegetables all over the Norland continent, it would probably think that he was complimenting it. 1 bottle of iodine, 1 bottle of antiseptic gauze, and I don't want anything else. If you're not selling, then forget it. Meg repeated. A portion of iodine and a portion of antiseptic gauze. The total is 1 gold coin. The system sounded a little unhappy. So expensive. 20 copper coins, no more. Meg raised his eyebrows. The total price of the items is 20 copper coins, and the postage is 80 copper coins. If you buy them separately, you won't enjoy the postage. If you want to deliver them to your doorstep in the remote wilderness, the postage will be doubled, the system replied seriously. 10 copper coins. Meg was even more calm now. 60. The postage will be halved. No less. The system insisted. 5. Meg didn't hesitate at all. Ding. 20 copper coins have been successfully deducted. Ding. The iodine and antiseptic gauze are ready. Host, please specify the receiving address. The system's voice sounded with a hint of reluctance and helplessness. Let's go to that rock over there. Meg smirked. The system was still too inexperienced to fight with him. He glanced at the big rock at the side. Are we going back? But this big pig and that hot spring. Can't we play a little longer and roast some pork? Amy looked at Meg with a conflicted expression. Meg squatted down and touched the water. The temperature was about 40 degrees. He looked at Amy with a smile and said, "You can take a hot bath at home, but the water temperature is really good. Amy, can you take off your shoes and soak your feet for a while?" Okay. Amy nodded. She found a square rock next to the hot spring and sat down. She took off her shoes and played with her feet happily. She turned around and waved at Ugly Duckling, who was standing at the side. "Ugly Duckling, come here. Let me wash your little paws." Meow. Ugly Duckling took a look at the misty hot spring and shook its little head. It was unwilling to do so. "I don't want to carry a dirty fellow." "If you don't want to wash your paws, then you can walk back home yourself," Amy said seriously as she looked at its muddy paws. Meow. Ugly Duckling took a look at the hillside covered with thorns and immediately became dejected. It reluctantly walked toward Amy. Meg shook his head with a smile. This cat's life was really pitiful. He reached out and picked up a small bag of medicine that appeared on the rock. With his back facing Amy, he untied a handkerchief to clean his wound and wrapped it with a few layers of antiseptic gauze. Life was even more precious in this world. Furthermore, as a chef, it was very important to have a pair of good hands. Although the wound wasn't serious, it would probably affect his cooking for the next few days. After bandaging his wound, Meg tricked the system into giving him a rope. He tied the turkey on the ground and pulled the knot. It was much more convenient to carry it than to carry the chicken leg directly. Meg looked at Amy, who was playing with Ugly Duckling with her little feet, and said with a smile, "Okay, dry your little feet. Let's go home." "Okay." Amy nodded. She rubbed her wet little feet on Ugly Duckling's face and giggled. Meow. Ugly Duckling wiped its face with its little paws and looked pitifully at Meg for help. Half of its clothes were wet, but its 4 little paws were very clean. Meg took out a dry towel from his small bag and helped Amy dry her little feet first. Then, he wiped the water off Ugly Duckling's body. He took out a biji bun from his bag, broke it in half, and handed it to Amy. He took a bite of the other half to replenish his energy. The biji bun in the morning was specially baked for a while. It was crispy and delicious, and it didn't choke like the pancakes. It tasted a little like a big steamed bun. "Father, this pancake is so delicious. I want to eat another one after I finish it." Amy held the pancake with her 2 little hands and ate it happily. She was eating like a cute little squirrel. Meow. Ugly Duckling looked up at Meg and called out twice. It felt as if it had been forgotten. "Then eat another one." Meg nodded with a smile. He took out another pancake, broke a small piece, and fed it to Ugly Duckling. He handed the rest to Amy. After eating the dessert, Meg put Ugly Duckling into his bag, and then carried Amy on his back. He held the pig's tooth that was more than half a meter long in one hand and the fire chicken that weighed more than 50 kilograms in the other, and walked slowly down the mountain. Amy looked around with her eagle eyes while lying on Meg's back, and suddenly asked curiously, "Father, where's your sword?" "It flew up into the sky again," Meg said with a smile as he walked down the mountain with light steps. "Really? Can we still call it down?" Amy looked up at the sky and asked curiously. That might be a little difficult. The father and daughter chatted as they went down the mountain along the path that they had opened up earlier. Chapter 232. All of the mercenaries looked at Mag, who was carrying a copper boar tusk in one hand, a tied-up turkey in the other, and an orange kitten in a small bag around his waist. He was carrying a little loli on his back, and all of them had strange expressions on their faces. Firstly, it was rare to see a mercenary come out with prey like this. Secondly, they had thought that the father and daughter would not be able to come down the mountain after encountering so many dangers. They didn't expect that not only did they come down the mountain safely, but the things in their hands also hinted at a certain possibility. Could it be that the fire chicken and the bronze wild boar were all killed by them? A mercenary sitting in a carriage asked as he looked at the boar's tusk in Mag's hand, and swallowed his saliva. Kid, I've already told you not to underestimate anyone who dares to enter the wilderness. If they don't have enough strength, then they must have the determination to die. In this world, there are very few fools who would joke with their lives. An old mercenary in the same carriage lectured with a smile as he raised his head to take a sip of wine. Everyone was silent. Many of them were third-tier and fourth-tier knights and magic casters who dared to come to Stranglethorn Vale for an adventure. They knew what the old mercenary meant. Obviously, Mag wasn't the kind of person who came here with the intention of dying. Since he could easily take care of a fiery chicken and a bronze wild boar, he was definitely not a fool. Therefore, Mag was sure that he was definitely not weak. He could give away a high-quality boar's tusk so casually, and only took 2 tusks from a copper boar, which meant that he was not short of money. Otherwise, as a qualified mercenary, he would have exploited the value of a prey to the extreme. Who is this man? Everyone was puzzled. They had been in the mercenary circle for many years, but this was a completely new face. They had no impression of him at all. Father, why are they all looking at us? Amy asked, puzzled. It should be because Amy is too cute this time. Meg replied with a smile. He ignored those gazes, and carried Amy down the hill, and walked along the main road toward Chaos City. It's better to keep a low profile. Meg smiled. The scene was flawless. Guy also saw Amy kill the boar with a fireball, so all the glory could be attributed to Amy. As the disciple of Crassus and Julian, this was something that would happen sooner or later. As for Mag, he could only announce his power to the world before he regained his former power and had the power and confidence not to repeat the same mistakes. Before that, he was Mamie Restaurant's boss. Mag, a chef. Boss, I think I saw Boss Mag and Amy just then. At the entrance of the Stranglethorn Valley, Mond looked back with a perplexed expression. Sargeras shook his head, and patted Mond's shoulder as he said, "That's impossible. If Boss Mag were to leave the city, he would definitely take Little Boss to the north. Let's hurry over. If that big fellow comes over, we'll have to wait here again." But Mond still wanted to say something, but Sargeras pushed him into the room. Father, are we going back to the restaurant now? Amy asked. Let's go home first. I'll make a delicious braised chicken and rice for Amy for lunch. Meg nodded. Braised chicken and rice. Is it made with this big rooster? Amy's eyes lit up, and she looked at the turkey in Meg's hand expectantly. Yes, it's made with this. Meg looked at the turkey in his hand. He was a little hesitant to deal with the feathers, but he thought that it was not easy to catch it, and he had to carry it home from so far away. If he didn't eat it, he would be letting himself down. System, this is the ingredient you asked me to catch. Is it okay if I cook it? Meg asked in his mind at the same time. The system recommends that the host only use the ingredients provided by the system from the beginning to the end. It helps to maintain the consistency of the taste of the food, and at the same time, it won't cause the cooking technique to be unstable because of the change in the ingredients. This way. The system's serious voice sounded. System, if you do this, then the next time you give me a mission like this, I'll just lie at home and sleep leisurely. So what if I have a little fitness level? At most, it's just 0. 5. I won't buy anything in the future. I'll save more money. Anyway, Amy has 2 powerful masters now. When the time comes, I'll just buy a few beautiful maids to serve me. Wouldn't it be great to live a salted fish life? Meg said leisurely. His tone was full of "I'm a salted fish. What can you do to me?" The system suddenly fell into silence, as if it was undergoing some kind of huge test. The corners of Meg's mouth curled up slightly. He wasn't in a hurry to rush the system. He continued to follow Amy's words as he strolled along. They were still the most eye-catching group on the road. However, the gazes of the mercenaries had already changed from that of a joke to that of envy. They were returning home with a full load so early in the morning. Host, the system has flipped through countless historical books. History tells us that money still needs to be spent because the current circulation and value of the currency relies on the stable and peaceful situation of the continent. But if one day, the war between species breaks out again and the entire continent descends into chaos, the currency system will collapse in an instant. Your savings will immediately become a pile of useless metal. When that time comes, the entire world will enter the stage of bartering. So, saving money is actually a very foolish act. Only when money is spent will it truly belong to you forever. Thinking of relying on a pile of metal and paper money to maintain prosperity for generations to come is simply a fool's dream, the system said seriously. Moreover, as a candidate for the god of cookery, how can you have such salted fish thoughts? How can you be worthy of such a grand transmigration? Are you worthy of those chefs who spent so much effort to curse you into this world? Are you worthy of little Amy, who has just idolized you? Most importantly, if the host's physical strength drops to 0. 5, you'll be no different from a cripple. Then, no matter how beautiful the maids are, what's the use? The host will only be able to watch from the sidelines. System, it looks like you still have to continue learning, Meg sighed and said calmly, can't they sit on me and move on their own? The system fell into a deep silence, accompanied by a few chaotic noises. Chapter 233. Deal. In the future, the host can freely use the ingredients obtained from completing missions, and it won't be considered a violation of the rules. The deathly silence lasted for a long time before the system's somewhat sullen voice rang out, carrying with it a strong sense of unwillingness. You're worth teaching. Meg nodded with satisfaction. Teaching the system had to be done step by step. He couldn't be too eager to suck up to it. That would cause the system to develop a bunch of unreasonable problems. Of course, he couldn't be too conceited either. After all the good stuff was with the system. Giving it a slap and giving it a reward was the correct way to teach the system. Of course, Meg was still in the experimental stage. He was slowly testing the system's bottom line and core settings. If there were rigid rules, he could still follow the system's instructions as long as there was no danger. After all, they were all in the same boat, so there was no need to be too rigid. The system didn't have integrity anyway. Meg never thought that he could sell it for money. He would be happier to lose some of it. The system is learning. If there's nothing else, please don't disturb the system. A line of words appeared in the system's mind, and then it went completely silent. You're not really going to learn that, are you? Meg's expression immediately became strange. Although the system liked to learn, it was an abyss of evil. He hoped that it could get out of it as soon as possible. The system is learning. A line of words began to appear in Meg's mind. Meg felt as if he had done something bad. It wouldn't be good if he taught a little kid the wrong things. Meg slowly walked toward Chaos City with Amy on his back. Halfway there, Amy insisted on getting down and walking on her own. She also carried Ugly Duckling in her arms, and tried her best to keep up with Meg's pace with her short little legs. What a sensible little girl. Meg slowed down a little, and walked in the middle of the road with her in his arms. He couldn't hide the smile on his face. Because Amy had walked 1/3 of the way on her own, and she had to carry a heavy load on her back, it took Meg and the others an hour and a half to reach the city gate. Phew, we're finally here. I'm so tired. Amy looked up at the city gate as a drop of sweat slid down her cheek and landed on Ugly Duckling's face. Amy looked down at Ugly Duckling with a serious expression and said, "Ugly Duckling, I think you've gotten heavier again. You have to go on a diet when you get back." Meow. Ugly Duckling widened its sapphire eyes as it looked at Amy with an innocent expression, trying to defend itself. "I don't care. I have to run 10 laps around the restaurant before I can go to bed," Amy insisted. Meow. Ugly Duckling was immediately dejected as it looked up into the sky with a resigned expression. Ugly Duckling is growing, just like Amy is also growing taller. That's why it's getting heavier. Meg smiled as he looked at Ugly Duckling, whose eyes lit up as it turned to look at him. He continued, "But I think it's good to run 10 laps before bed. You need to exercise when you're growing." Meow. Ugly Duckling continued to look up into the sky. "Let's go. It's great that Amy came here on her own. Come on up, and we'll go on the bike." Meg squatted down with a smile. After Amy got on, they walked into the city. "Ha! Captain, isn't that the father and daughter from this morning? They're back so soon. Is that a turkey in his hand? Could that be the tusk of a bronze-skinned wild boar in his other hand?" The guards at the city gate also noticed Meg, who was carrying Amy on his back. 2 young guards couldn't help but exclaim softly. "Chaos City is full of crouching tigers and hidden dragons. We really can't underestimate anyone." Barty nodded slightly as he looked at Meg's back. He was also a little surprised. After entering the city, Meg directly said in his mind, "System, I want to pick up my bike." After walking for an entire morning, he was also a little tired. System learning. However, only that line of words kept repeating in his mind. Meg raised an eyebrow. This system is finished. Suddenly, a small icon appeared in the lower right corner of his eyes. On it were the words, "Self-service bike pickup." He tried to click on it with his mind, and a 3-dimensional map immediately popped up. It was a map with a radius of 50 meters around him, and it prompted him to choose a location to pick up his bike. Meg looked around, and decided to pick up his bike in the empty alley next to him. After hearing the notification that the bike had arrived, he walked into the alley with Amy. "Get on. Let's go home." Looking at the bicycle parked in the alley, Meg said with a smile. "This system is smart. It knows to set up a self-service bike pickup service." "Okay, let's go home." Amy nodded happily. She ran to the bicycle, put Ugly Duckling in the basket, and climbed onto the back seat. Meow. Ugly Duckling clung onto the basket with its little paws, and looked at Amy with a pitiful expression. "Ugly Duckling, hold on." Meg put the pig's tooth in the basket, and got on the bicycle. He held the handle with one hand and the turkey with the other, and the bicycle sped forward. It turned out of the alley, and headed toward the Aiden Square. Meow. Ugly Duckling tried its best to hug the pig's tooth, which was rolling around in the basket, to give itself some space. "I hope there aren't any customers at the entrance." Meg looked at his watch. It was 11 o'clock a.m. Usually, there would be customers lining up at the entrance of the restaurant at this time. Since he had said that he would take a day off, he naturally had to keep his word. If he said he would take a day off, then he would take a day off. Meg had to give his hand some time to recover. Fried rice and tofu pudding were fine, but making rigiamo required kneading the dough. The wounds on his hands and right hands couldn't be healed. There were no customers at the entrance of the restaurant, but Meg saw a mountain of knives half a meter high in the distance. They reflected the cold light of the sun, and his eyes were almost blinded. So fierce. Meg raised his eyebrows. He could feel the terrible resentment of the customers from the glint of the knives and swords. Wow, so many beautiful knives and swords. Father, can I choose one? Amy's eyes lit up as she looked at the pile of knives and swords expectantly. Okay, then Amy can choose one that you like. The bicycle stopped at the entrance of the restaurant, and Meg nodded with a smile. Some of the knives and swords looked very delicate and sharp. Rich people are really different when they are capricious. Chapter 234. In the blink of an eye, another month has passed. Thank you for your continued support. However, after breaking free from the seal in the morning, I discovered that the monthly votes ranking was a little tragic. Even the categories were about to drop out of the rankings. Where is the number one that we agreed on? And number one is probably a little difficult, but I still have to have a dream. I'll set my sights on being number one. This month, I'll charge for the categories on the monthly votes ranking. If I can get number one, Qingyu won't rest during the new year and will continue to work hard. Let's change the rules for this month's monthly votes to 500 votes plus one update. No upper limit. I hope that you guys can let me add a few more updates. Then, I'll sum up last month's lack of updates. Last month, I counted and added a total of 50 updates. I still worked very hard to pay it back. Then, I still owe a total of 4 updates from last month's monthly votes plus one update. The rest is all from the rewards from the big shots. The rules for rewards and updates will not change. It's still 20,000 rewards plus one update and that's it. Begging for monthly votes. Begging for monthly votes. Begging for monthly votes. Chapter 235. Meg raised his hand and looked at it. The scar-looking wound had already healed. Except for the new skin that was a little pink, there was no scar at all. The magic that only the core members of the elf race could practice was indeed extraordinary. Furthermore, apart from the wound on his hand, the last beam of green light had also disappeared into Mag's body, and the strain on his leg had also been treated. He could no longer feel any pain, and even his sore and swollen arm had been effectively relieved. It was as if he had taken a hot bath, and his entire body felt very comfortable. Thank you, Aisha. Meg got up and stretched his arms and legs. He looked at Sally gratefully. Magic was indeed a very miraculous existence. You're welcome. Sally nodded slightly. She looked at Amy and said regretfully, life magic can only be learned by those who have bathed in the spring of life. Amy can't learn it now. Okay. Amy was a little disappointed. She turned to Meg and asked, Father, should we go find the spring of life to bathe? This might have to be done a little later. Meg shook his head. Sally had only told him half of the story. According to the information he had read yesterday, apart from bathing in the spring of life, a pure elven bloodline was also a prerequisite. Furthermore, only those who had been acknowledged by the tree of life could cultivate it. Okay, then Amy can't learn it for now. Amy nodded. She looked at Meg's hand and said happily, Father's hand is completely healed. Then I can make delicious food for Amy. Amy is hungry. I want to eat that big rooster. Boss, you said that there will be a new dish tomorrow. Is it related to turkey? Yabamiya also looked at Meg curiously. Yes. You probably haven't had lunch yet. Then stay in the shop and eat. I'll make braised chicken for you. Meg nodded with a smile and prepared to take the turkey from Yabamiya. Yabamiya withdrew her hand and said with a smile, "Boss, you can go and change your clothes first. I'll help you deal with the turkey. I used to make it in the kitchen. The feathers are very clean." "All right, then I'll have to trouble you." Meg looked at Yabamiya's eager eyes and nodded with a smile. If he were to deal with the turkey himself, the scene would be extremely tragic. It would be better to let a professional do it. "Come on, let's go upstairs to take a shower and change." Meg picked up Amy and headed upstairs. "Does Ugly Duckling want to take a bath?" Amy asked as she looked at Ugly Duckling in the basket. "Wash one too." Meg picked Ugly Duckling up, and it immediately woke up from its dizzy state upon hearing that it was going to take a bath. It struggled unwillingly in Meg's hands. "I don't want an ugly duckling that doesn't bathe," Amy said seriously. "Meow." Ugly Duckling immediately gave up. Meg gave Amy and Ugly Duckling a bath first. He changed them into a clean and refreshing aqua blue dress, and tied their hair into 2 cute ponytails. He let the 2 little ones go downstairs to play, and then he turned on the water and took a bath himself. "My body is still too weak. It's not a problem for me to face a first-tier magic beast, and I might be able to fight a second-tier magic beast. But if it's a third-tier magic beast, I can only run, and I'm not confident that I'll be able to escape." Meg closed his eyes and pondered. Of course, he was just teasing the system. As a man who aspired to be a model father, how could he not be strong enough to protect his daughter? However, today's small test had given Mag a lot of confidence. His body was indeed like an untapped treasure trove. Every time he upgraded his strength, he would be able to unlock a portion of his abilities. He was very much looking forward to this kind of growth potential. After he fully recovered and continued to upgrade his strength, would he be able to surpass Meg Alex when he was at his peak? That was something that was worth looking forward to. Only by becoming truly powerful could he ensure that what happened 3 years ago wouldn't happen again. Meg had no interest in experiencing the same despair again. To increase your strength, you have to start by cooking every dish. Meg came out of the water and wiped himself dry with a towel. He looked at himself in the mirror with a smile. There were already a few visible muscles on his abdomen, and his black eyes were especially bright and spirited. His dejected look was gone. Meg changed into a clean chef's suit and went downstairs. The air in the restaurant was fresh and humid, and the floor, tables, and chairs were all very clean and bright. Amy was squatting on the floor and playing with Ugly Duckling. Sally was looking intently at Amy and Ugly Duckling, and she turned around upon hearing the sound. She stood up. "Have a seat. Relax when you're not working. The restaurant is very clean," Meg said with a smile. Only Sally could clean the entire restaurant so well. Sally nodded and sat down again with a hint of joy in her eyes. Meg walked into the kitchen, and Yabamiya was doing the final cleaning. The turkey had already been prepared and placed in a large basin. There wasn't a single hair on its dark red skin, and its stomach had also been prepared. The edible parts had been washed and placed on plates, and the chicken feathers had been thrown into the kitchen waste bin. The entire kitchen was still clean and tidy, and it didn't look any worse after killing the turkey. "Boss, do I need to cut the turkey out? Is this okay?" Yabamiya, whose sleeves were rolled up, turned to Meg with a hint of nervousness and anticipation in her eyes. This was the first time she had participated in the preparation of ingredients since she came to the restaurant. "Well, Mia did a great job, but I'll take care of the rest. You can go out and have a rest." If he had been the one to deal with this turkey, he would have made a mess. How to deal with the feathers would be a headache for him. "Good job. Meg said, looking at Yabamiya with admiration. He was sincere. If he had been the one to deal with the turkey, he would have made a mess. Okay. Although Yabamiya wanted to do more, she knew Meg's character. She wiped the water on the stove with a dry towel and then walked out of the kitchen. If it weren't for the new year, Meg would have given Yabamiya the Best Employee of the Year award. He couldn't find a second employee who was so careful and efficient. System, come out and give me a reward. Meg looked at the lonely Chinese kitchen knife on the knife rack and shouted directly in his heart. System learning. The same line of words floated in the air in response to Meg. Meg looked at it carefully. He didn't know when a small reward sign had appeared in the lower left corner. He clicked on it with his consciousness. Chapter 236. The monthly Aiden Square 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 Aiden Square. There were more than 30 people sitting in a large conference hall. A middle-aged man with neatly combed hair stood up and said loudly. Two servants went up and distributed a stack of white lists in front of everyone. Most of the people sitting in the conference hall were men. They were all dressed luxuriously, and one could tell that they were wearing expensive accessories. Any one of them was a big shot in the Aiden Square, and a core member of the Aiden Chamber of Commerce. However, at this moment, they were all sitting in silence, quietly listening to the middle-aged man speak. There was a woman in a bright red dress sitting in the corner. Her lips were flaming red, and the corners of her mouth were slightly raised. She looked at this scene with a hint of mockery, but she just sat there quietly and didn't say anything. A coin that was half dragon coin and half gold coin was seamlessly twirling at her fingertips. At the head of the table, a thin old man with a somewhat old-fashioned expression sat beside the middle-aged man. He was wearing a gray-white long-sleeved shirt that was buttoned up meticulously. His sparse white hair was neatly combed to the back of his head. The shape of the white beard on his chin was a little strange. The lower end of the beard was not naturally pointed, but had been cut flat in the middle. Therefore, the shape of his face was a little square and looked even more old-fashioned. President, do you have any other instructions? The middle-aged man bowed and asked humbly. Everyone looked at the old man with respect and awe. Jeffrey Moreton was the founder of the Aiden Chamber of Commerce. Back then, he joined forces with the Buffett family, the Dodges family, and the Marquis family to establish the Aiden Chamber of Commerce. After more than 50 years of development, it became a famous chamber of commerce on the entire continent. The family Moreton was also very famous on the Norland continent. They held a dominant position in the spice market, as well as in the food and cloth market. Their business territory had long encompassed the entire Norland continent. What are you doing here? Jeffrey ignored the middle-aged man's question. He looked up at the woman in the red dress sitting in the corner. Even though his face was expressionless, one could tell from his sharp gaze that he was a little displeased. Everyone couldn't help but look at the woman. Her bright red dress made her very conspicuous in the conference hall, especially when there was only one woman in the room. She looked to be around 17 or 18 years old. Her wavy brown hair casually draped over her shoulders. Her appearance was quite beautiful, but her pair of eyebrows were raised like two small knives. She did not appear delicate but instead gave off a strong feeling. She didn't need any makeup on her tender white face, but her lips were bright red, just like the red dress she was wearing. It was a stark contrast to her snow-white skin, making it hard for people to forget her face and her sexy red lips with just one glance. No one looked at her with disdain in their eyes even though Jeffrey had called her out. Instead, they were all waiting for her response. Hill Buffett held the coin between her fingers. She looked up at Jeffrey without any hint of fear on her face. She smiled and said, "President Jeffrey, as the representative of the Buffett family, why can't I attend a board meeting of the Aden Chamber of Commerce? Our three major families generally don't excessively participate in the decisions of the Aden Chamber of Commerce, but we can't forget that we're also founders of the Aden Chamber of Commerce." Hill's voice was very calm, but there was a sharp glint in her eyes as she looked at Jeffrey. Their age gap didn't inspire any fear or respect in her. The entire conference room fell deathly silent. No one dared to make a sound. The leader of the Buffett family was also one of the founders of the Aden Chamber of Commerce. The Buffett family's half-gold, half-dragon insignia could be found all over the Norland continent. Anyone with a deposit certificate from the Buffett family could withdraw all of their money from any Buffett bank on the continent. This greatly reduced the amount of trouble and danger that merchants had to face when carrying large amounts of cash. Even the ruling class of all races had guaranteed the safety of the Buffett Bank, and it was undoubtedly the #1 bank in the world. Miss Hill Buffett wasn't just a pretty face. She had been in and out of the bank since she was 3 years old. By the time she was 6 years old, she had become an accountant in a bank, and by the time she was 10 years old, she had opened her first bank. On the day of her 18th birthday, the leader of the Buffett family announced that Miss Hill Buffett would be the first in line to inherit the Buffett family as the eldest daughter of the third generation of the Buffett family. While the Buffett family's decision seemed absurd to the outside world, the Buffett family was exceptionally calm internally. Ian Buffett began to take a back seat, and the transfer of power within the family was proceeding in an orderly manner. Everyone began to cooperate with Hill to become the helmsman of the Buffett family. Those who were paying attention to the Buffett family weren't surprised by this. Miss Hill's sudden appearance had accelerated the Buffett Bank, which had been sailing steadily for decades. Her personal savings model had broken the Buffett Bank's sole function of depositing and withdrawing money from other places. The stable monthly interest rate had attracted many ordinary people to deposit their excess cash in Buffett banks. It was convenient and fast to withdraw cash at any time, and Buffett banks had gained a large amount of savings just by relying on this method. It had largely solved the high costs and risks of transferring gold coins from one place to another. "Miss Hill is a genius." This was the only comment Ian Buffett had made about Miss Hill. This alone was enough to establish her position in the Buffett family. To the directors present, Miss Hill's reputation and status was still somewhat inferior to Jeffrey's. However, at the age of 18, she had limitless possibilities. The Buffett family's giant wheel was still accelerating, and in the next few decades, she could stand at the top of the business world. How long did Jeffrey have left? He didn't even have a qualified successor. Choosing a little girl to take the helm. That old man Ian must have fished too much. His brain must have been eaten by the fish. Jeffrey's mood didn't change in the slightest because of Miss Hill's provocative words. He reached for the black cane on the table and stood up. There was a trace of disdain in his voice as he turned and walked towards the door. The directors present all stood up to show their respect for his departure. Chapter 237. It's almost time for the monthly Aden Square Aden Square Aden Squares 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 Monthly Aden Square Aden Square Aden Square Aden Square Aden Square Aden Squares restaurants have been in the top 18 months in a row, and the president hopes that everyone can give their full support to the restaurants under our Chamber of Commerce this time. This is the list of restaurants for this month, and every vote of the employees is very important. Unity and cooperation are the tenets of the Chamber of Commerce, and also the foundation of our foothold on the Norland continent. There were more than 30 people sitting in a large conference hall. A middle-aged man with meticulously combed hair stood up and announced loudly. 2 servants walked up to each of them and handed out a stack of white name lists. Most of the people sitting in the conference hall were men, all of whom were dressed lavishly, and one could see that they were wearing expensive accessories. Any one of them was a renowned boss in the Aden Square, as well as a core member of the board of directors of the Chamber of Commerce. However, at this moment, they were all sitting in silence, listening to the middle-aged man speak. There was only a woman in a bright red dress sitting in the corner. She had fiery red lips, and the corners of her lips were slightly curled up as she looked on with a hint of mockery in her eyes. However, she only sat there quietly and didn't say anything. A coin that was half dragon coin and half gold coin was spinning nimbly between her fingers. At the head of the table, next to the middle-aged man, sat a skinny old man with a somewhat old-fashioned expression. He wore a grayish-white button gown, and his sparse white hair was neatly combed to the back of his head. The shape of his white beard was a little strange. The lower end of his beard was not naturally pointed, but it was cut in the middle, so the shape of his face looked a little square, and he looked even more old-fashioned. "President, is there anything else I can do for you?" the middle-aged man asked in a humble manner. Everyone turned to look at the old man with a hint of awe and veneration in their eyes. This was Geoffrey Moreton, the founder of the Chamber of Commerce. He had founded the Chamber of Commerce with the Buffett family, the Dodges family, and the Marquis family, and after over 50 years of development, it had become a renowned chamber of commerce on the entire continent. The Moreton family was also extremely renowned on the Norland continent. They dominated the spice market, as well as food and cloth industries. Their business empire had already encompassed the entire Norland continent. "Why are you here?" Geoffrey ignored the middle-aged man's question and turned to the woman in the red dress sitting in the corner. Even though his face was completely expressionless, it was quite clear from his sharp gaze that he was displeased. Everyone couldn't help but turn to look at the woman. Her vibrant red dress made her appear extremely eye-catching in the conference room, especially when there was only one woman in the entire conference room. She appeared to be only around 17 or 18 years of age. Her long, wavy brown hair casually draped over her shoulders, and she was quite beautiful. However, her eyebrows were raised like a pair of daggers, and she appeared to be quite domineering instead of delicate. There was no need for any makeup on her tender, white face, but her lips were bright red, just like the red dress she was wearing. It formed a strong contrast with her snow-white skin, making it hard for people to forget that face and those sexy red lips with just one look. Everyone was appraising her in silence, but they didn't seem to be mocking her at all. Instead, they were waiting for her response. The coin on Hill Buffett's fingertip stopped spinning, and the coin, which was unknown whether it was a gold coin or a dragon coin, was held in his hand. He looked up at Geoffrey, and there was no hint of fear or retreat on his face as he said with a smile, "President Geoffrey, as the representative of the Buffett family, why can't I attend the board meeting of the Chamber of Commerce? Our three major clans generally don't participate too much in the Chamber's decisions, but don't forget that we're also the founders of the Chamber, and we're also members of the Chamber's board of directors, right?" Hill's voice was very calm, but she was appraising Geoffrey with a sharp gaze. Her age gap didn't seem to strike her with any awe or veneration. The entire conference room was deathly silent, and no one dared to utter a single sound as they looked on. The leader of the Buffett family was also one of the founders of the Chamber of Commerce, and the Buffett family's bank had been established throughout the entire Norland continent. With a certificate of deposit from the Buffett Bank, one could withdraw all of their money from any Buffett bank on the entire continent. This drastically reduced the risks and inconveniences faced by merchants carrying large amounts of cash around. Even the rulers of the various races had guaranteed the safety of the Buffett Bank, and it was undoubtedly the #1 bank in the world. As for this young Mistress Hill Buffett, she was no mere flower vase. She began working in banks at the age of 3, became an accountant at the age of 6, and established her own bank at the age of 10. On the day of her 18th birthday, the leader of the Buffett family announced that Hill Buffett had completely defeated the second-generation heir of the Buffett family, and as the eldest daughter of the third generation of the Buffett family, she became the first-in-line heir to the Buffett family. In response to this decision, which appeared to be absurd to the outside world, the Buffett family was very calm. Ian Buffett began to take a back seat, and the succession of power within the family was also progressing in an orderly manner. Everyone began to cooperate with Hill to become the leader of the Buffett family. Those who truly paid close attention to the Buffett family were not surprised by this. Hill's sudden appearance had sped up the massive Buffett Bank, which had been operating steadily for several decades. The personal savings model that she had invented had broken the Buffett Bank's sole function of depositing and withdrawing money from other locations. The stable monthly interest rate attracted many ordinary people to deposit their excess cash in the Buffett Bank. The fact that they could withdraw cash at any time was very convenient and fast, and the Buffett Bank had earned a large sum of money just by relying on this feature alone. To a large extent, the high fees and risks associated with transferring gold coins to other locations had been resolved. Hill is a genius. This was the only evaluation that Ian Buffett had of Hill. Just this alone was enough for her to establish a foothold in the Buffett family. To the board members present, Hill's reputation and status were still somewhat inferior to that of Jeffries, but the fact that she was only 18 years old gave her limitless possibilities. The Buffett family was still accelerating, and in the next few decades, she would be standing at the pinnacle of the entire business world. As for how much longer could Jeffrey live? He didn't even have a qualified successor. Choosing a little girl to steer the ship. Looks like that old coot Ian has been fishing too much, and his brain has been eaten by the fish. Jeffrey's expression did not change in the slightest in response to Hill's provocative words. He picked up his black cane from beside the table, and rose to his feet with a hint of disdain in his voice as he departed toward the door. All of the board members present rose to their feet to express their respect for his departure. Chapter 238. Big Sister Aisha, Big Sister Mia and I are learning a dance called Spring is Here from the Mushroom Fairy. Do you want to learn it with us? Amy walked over to Sally with the music box in her arms. She followed her gaze into the kitchen, and said with a smile, "I know that father is very handsome, but don't keep staring at him. Teacher Luna says that it's not very ladylike." Sally opened her mouth and looked at Amy, who seemed to have seen through everything. She didn't know how to explain herself. She was sure that she really was just thinking about the new dish. Although, she had to admit that Meg did look very handsome when he was cooking seriously, she definitely wasn't looking at him in secret. Spring is here. Sally blushed for some reason, and she quickly changed the subject according to Amy's words. Yes, it's super beautiful. Amy nodded seriously. She placed the music box on the table and clicked start. She smiled and said, "If you don't believe me, you can take a look." The music of Elysium Bliss began to play. The sound of an unknown instrument made Sally feel an inexplicable urge to get up and dance to the beat. The little figure standing in the middle of the music box also began to dance to the music. Her movements were enchanting, but they didn't lose any of their power. This dance looked different from all the dances that she had learned since she was a child. It was a completely different style from the graceful dances that she had learned, and it made her feel an inexplicable sense of embarrassment. However, her gaze just couldn't shift away, and she even had the urge to stand up and dance to the dance. After the song ended, Amy looked at Sally with anticipation in her eyes, and asked, "How about it? Do you want to dance Spring is Here with us?" "Yeah, come with us, Aisha. We don't have anything to do right now anyway." Yabamiya had also extended an invitation. She had spent some time alone with Sally in the morning, and the two of them had become closer, but it would definitely be better if they could dance together. Friend was a distant word for the former Yabamiya. Even the female workers who also helped in the kitchen looked down on her. The men's eyes were full of evil intentions, just like the boss's son. But in Amy's, everything had changed. Even the beautiful elves, who were usually high and mighty in her eyes, no longer seemed so difficult to get along with. They still liked to eat tofu pudding, and they still could eat a bowl of vegetable noodles that cost 10 copper coins. Meg was the boss, and Amy was still young, so she hoped that her first real friend would be Sally. If possible, she hoped that would be the case. Well, if you don't think that I'm a slow learner, then I'll join you. Sally looked at Amy and Yabamiya's expectant gazes, and hesitated for a moment before nodding with a smile. Since this dance was called Spring is Here, then it was a little seductive, so it must be a celebration of the beautiful spring season. Of course not, Sister Aisha and the Mushroom Fairy are dressed so similarly. They'll definitely look good when they dance. Amy shook her head with anticipation. You can start now. Yabamiya had already moved 2 tables away, and there was enough space for the 3 of them to learn the dance. Let's start the 3-person mode. If there are 3 of you, you can form a group dance. Although everyone's movements are slightly different, the effect will be better if you dance together. The Mushroom Fairy split into 3 and began to teach the dance in detail. That's amazing. Is it really a fairy? Sally looked at this scene in amazement. She had thought that it was just a toy that Meg had made for Amy, but the fairy in the music box looked exactly like a real fairy. She was very smart and seemed to know a lot. She could sing and dance. Yes, it's real. Although I sometimes feel that the Mushroom Fairy is very pitiful, Father said that she can't be released. She doesn't belong to this world, and she'll die if she's released. Amy nodded and looked at the fairy in the music box with pity. She's so pitiful. Sally and Yabamiya also looked at the fairy with pity. Hurry up and learn. Do your best. The fairy's cheerful voice sounded, and she began to demonstrate the dance moves seriously. I'm so touched. She's so pitiful, but she still maintains such a positive attitude towards life. She's teaching us seriously. We should learn well, Yabamiya said seriously. Yes, we should learn seriously. Sally and Amy nodded and then began to learn with earnest expressions. Sally has also joined in. A fairy in a cheongsam, a half-dragon in a maid costume, a magic loli. I think this kind of Elysium Jodo will work. Meg looked back and saw that Sally had also joined in learning the Elysium Jodo. He was surprised and a little expectant. The Elysium Jodo's singing and the Mushroom Fairy's detailed explanation echoed in the restaurant. The 3 of them had just met not long ago, but they already looked very harmonious. From time to time, they would even correct each other's movements and laugh together. They looked very happy. Meg watched his daughters learn to dance as he cooked. He was very relaxed. Of course, it was also very pleasing to the eyes to admire the dance moves of the 2 beauties. Yabamiya's dance moves were a little stiff, while Sally, who was clearly adept at singing and dancing, had a good foundation in dance. Even though she was a little late to the party, she had already learned the basics, so she quickly picked up the dance moves. She was already beginning to look a little like the Mushroom Fairy in her cheongsam. An hour later, Meg came out of the kitchen with 4 bowls of braised chicken on a tray. He placed them gently on the table, and then went back in to get some rice. As soon as the kitchen door opened, the tantalizing aroma of braised chicken wafted out. The delicious meat and fresh mushroom aroma immediately attracted the attention of the 3 girls, who were completely immersed in the dance. Their eyes lit up at the sight of the 4 bowls on the table. Ugly Duckling, who was lying on the counter, also stared at the braised chicken on the table with wide eyes. It crawled over to the edge of the counter. Wow! It smells so good. Father, is this braised chicken? Amy was the first to run over. She looked at the golden braised chicken in the bowl, and then at Meg, who was carrying 4 bowls of rice out of the kitchen. Go wash your hands and eat. There's only one dish for lunch today, braised chicken. Meg nodded with a smile as he placed the 4 bowls of rice down one by one. Yay! I want to eat this delicious rooster. Amy nodded with elation. She turned off the music box and was the first to make her way to the kitchen. It'll definitely be delicious. Yabamiya also made her way to the kitchen. I can't eat too much meat, but this shiitake mushroom really smells good, and it feels a little familiar. Sally's eyes also lit up as she followed them into the kitchen to wash her hands. Chapter 239. Meg pulled out a chair and sat down. He looked at the golden pieces of rice and the bowl of moonlight fragrance rice, and nodded with satisfaction. This was the first time he had made braised chicken and rice in the real world, and he gave it full marks for its appearance, but he didn't know how it would taste. Wow, Father, are those little moons in the rice? It's so beautiful. Amy ran out and pulled out a chair to sit across from Mag. She looked at the bowl of rice in front of her with glowing eyes, and a hint of elation appeared on her face. It really is little moons. How did little moons get into the rice grains? Yabamiya was also looking at the rice bowl with amazement. This was the first time she had seen such beautiful rice. It's so amazing. Sally blinked in disbelief. She was already shocked by the Yangzhou fried rice with the spring of life's flavor, but she didn't think that Meg would be able to make such beautiful rice. It was as if she were dreaming, and she couldn't help but wonder, where did Mr. Mac get all these ingredients from? This is moonlight fragrance rice. Sit down and eat. Meg nodded with a smile, and gestured for Yabamiya and Sally to sit down. They had been out all morning, and their stomachs were already growling from smelling the alluring aroma of the braised chicken. Okay. Sally and Yabamiya nodded and also sat down. Their eyes were immediately drawn to the braised chicken in front of them. The large earthenware bowl was almost filled to the brim. Something had been added to the surface of the chicken, and it had been dyed a golden color. The color of each piece was very uniform, and there were no flaws at all. The golden potatoes hadn't fallen apart, and the lettuce was still tender and green. The shiitake mushrooms that had been cut into strips were scattered among the chicken pieces, and the green and red peppers were interspersed among them, giving the dish an even more eye-catching color. The chicken and side dishes were enshrouded in a golden red broth, and the aroma of the mushrooms wafted through the air. Gulp. The 3 of them swallowed almost at the same time. This aroma was simply too alluring. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling lay on the counter and cried out twice. It was also swallowing its saliva and extending its little paws as if it were begging for food. However, the 4 of them who were distracted by the delicious food ignored it and picked up their chopsticks at the same time. It should be fine to eat more side dishes and less chicken, right? Sally looked at the chicken in her bowl with a bit of hesitation. Although she was not a vegetarian, she had strictly controlled the amount of meat she ate every day. Firstly, it was to maintain her body shape, and secondly, it was to prevent eating too much meat from destroying the purity of her life magic. Only when she was in awe of life could she receive the power and blessing of life magic. Oh, it's delicious. Amy was the first to pick up a piece of chicken. She opened her mouth and took a big bite of it. She chewed happily, and her big eyes sparkled. She quickly swallowed it and mumbled a few words. Then, she took a bite of the remaining half of the chicken and chewed happily. Let me try it too. Yabamiya also picked up a piece of chicken and put it into her mouth. The thick broth around the chicken melted in her mouth. The flavor of the broth was enhanced to the extreme by the shiitake mushrooms. It was rich but not greasy, and all of her taste buds were instantly stimulated. After biting into the chicken meat, the tender meat was wrapped in a thin layer of sweet syrup. There was only a hint of sweetness, but it greatly enhanced the taste of the chicken meat. Feeling the refreshing feeling of eating meat in one bite, one's entire body was immersed in the experience of delicious food. Is it really that good? Sally's throat moved. She picked up a piece of shiitake mushroom and slowly put it into her mouth. The rich flavor of the chicken broth melted in her mouth. After biting into that small piece of shiitake mushroom, the rich flavor that seeped out made her feel as if she had been infused with delicious food, and her eyes immediately lit up. The mushrooms in the forest were one of the elves' favorite foods. They hid under withered leaves or grew on tree trunks. After the rain, they would emerge one after another. They were a gift from nature. Delicious mushrooms didn't even need to be seasoned. They only needed to be cut open and boiled in water, and a pot of delicious mushroom broth would be ready. The mushrooms in the wind forest were especially delicious. However, compared to this unknown brown mushroom, even the most delicious mushroom she had ever eaten couldn't compare to a tenth of this shiitake mushroom. The freshness of the mushrooms had seeped into the chicken broth, but it didn't lose any of its original flavor. After absorbing the chicken broth, the mushrooms became even more delicious and refreshing. How can mushrooms be so delicious? Sally looked at the braised chicken, and felt as if her worldview had been shattered. She had once thought that the mushrooms in the wind forest were the best on the entire continent, but it looked like that wasn't the case at all. Meat scooped a spoonful of rice into her mouth, and chewed happily. Moon rice is delicious too. Little Moon tastes so sweet, she said happily. Then eat another bowl after you're done. Also, this rice will become even more delicious after being sprinkled with chicken broth, Meg said with a smile. Looking at the joyful and blissful expressions on their faces, he naturally felt a sense of accomplishment. There was nothing happier than having the food he made recognized. He scooped up a few spoonfuls of chicken broth and poured it into the rice bowl. The reddish-golden chicken broth was quickly absorbed by the rice, and the white rice turned into a reddish-golden color. The little moon in the center of the bowl seemed to be glowing under the light, making it look even more alluring. Meg scooped up a spoonful of rice and put it into his mouth. After chewing for a while, his eyes immediately lit up. The delicious chicken broth perfectly seeped into the slightly dry rice, causing the texture of the rice to reach the optimal hardness. With a bite, the fragrant and sweet little moons exploded one after another, fusing together with the delicious chicken broth. It was as if a fusion was taking place in the mouth. The taste couldn't be better. Even if it's just this chicken broth, I think I can finish 2 bowls of rice. Meg chewed carefully, and a blissful smile appeared on his face as he savored the delicious taste spreading in his mouth. 2 horse-drawn carriages stopped at the entrance, and Gourmet and Deveau jumped down from the first carriage. A young magic caster in a black magician's robe and a young knight in silver light armor with a long sword strapped to his waist alighted from the second carriage, and stopped beside Gourmet and the others. Chapter 240. The signboard of the restaurant was made of some unknown metal, and it was shining under the sun. The wooden door was made of the best mahogany, and it had a classic and exquisite handle. What was even more amazing was the transparent crystal on one side. Although there was something white inside that blocked one's view, one could still imagine how big the transparent crystal was cut from. What kind of craftsmanship was required to cut it so evenly and flawlessly? This crystal is probably worth thousands of dragon coins, right? Deveau asked hesitantly with his eyebrows raised. Boss, this restaurant seems to be closed for the day. It's not open, Johnny said as he took a few steps forward and glanced at the notice on the door. Did the owner of this restaurant owe a lot of money and run away with the waiters? Why are there so many blades piled up at the door? Gabriel asked as he walked forward with his saber. He glanced at the mountain of blades in front of the door with a hint of mockery and ridicule. Boss, what should we do? Gabriel asked as he turned around and looked at DeVoe. He tapped his finger gently on the hilt of his saber, and a strand of long red hair fell from his forehead. It made his pale face with a long scar look a little sinister. As a third-tier knight who had failed to pass the exam, his strength had reached the standard of a third-tier knight. However, the examiner was a little ignorant, and said that he had no humility and compassion, and could not be a qualified knight. Humility and compassion are things that only the weak have. Why would a brave knight need such things? Gabriel recalled what the examiner had said, and still remembered his answer. Then, he naturally became a knight who had failed to pass the exam, and became the most ruthless watcher of DeVoe's tavern. Indeed, he had no compassion. He was paid to do things for others, and that was his only standard. As for what he was doing, he never cared. Screw it up. Since he's not around, we have to teach him a lesson. There are some people that he can't afford to offend. There are some words that he has to pay the price for. DeVoe's smile was a little cold as he waved his hand. That. Smash it too. Gabriel's gaze turned to the floor-to-ceiling glass at the side. He licked his lips, and his eyes suddenly became a little excited. Such a huge crystal, he would never be able to own it in his life. But if he could destroy it, it seemed to be more exciting than owning it. Just smash the door. DeVoe's voice rose a few octaves. The crystal was too expensive, and it would be troublesome if the Grey Temple found out about it. A door would be fine, and he could just smash it and get away with it. Could it be that the owner of a small restaurant dared to make a big fuss over a door? DeVoe coughed softly and regained his composure. He raised his hand and said, "Go ahead." "All right." Gabriel withdrew her gaze in disappointment and resumed her lazy expression. She unsheathed the sword at her waist and slashed at the door of the restaurant without any fancy moves. A third-level knight's sword was enough to cut down a thick tree or a wooden door. There was no need to use a second sword. "How dare you try to set me on fire? Then I'll smash your store to smithereens. Let's see if you can still sell tofu pudding." Goudinia's expression was a little excited. It wasn't that he hadn't thought about it before, but he lacked the courage to do so. Today, after being provoked by Ward, a wave of ruthlessness surged up. He naturally didn't dare to commit murder in Chaos City, nor did he dare to commit arson. However, he was used to smashing a store and threatening someone to get back at them. The Grey Temple ensured the safety of all the shops, but they couldn't guarantee absolute order. They had been in the Aiden Square for decades, and no one knew better than them how to take advantage of these loopholes. Furthermore, according to their past experience, the shops that were bullied would only swallow their anger. After all, there were many things that were impossible to guard against when doing business in the Aiden Square. If they were caught, they wouldn't be able to survive. Bam! A dull thump erupted, but the door didn't break. Instead, the longsword in Gabriel's hand was repelled, and she stumbled back a step as she stared at the completely unscathed wooden door with incredulity in her eyes. How? How is this possible? Walter, who was standing beside the carriage, also glared and said with some dissatisfaction, "Gabriel, you spent all your fucking strength on women's bellies, right? If you can't even break a wooden door, then what's the point of keeping you around?" This door. A hint of surprise also appeared on Johnny's face. He had been standing off to the side, and was naturally aware that even though Gabriel hadn't used his full strength, he had still used 70% or 80% of his strength. Even a door wrapped in iron would have been sliced in half, let alone an ordinary wooden door. However, there wasn't even a mark left on the door. It was as if the sword had struck nothing but air. If a magic barrier had been set up around the door, then it would have been understandable. However, he hadn't sensed any magic fluctuations at all. This was simply far too bizarre. Damn it! Gabriel's expression immediately became ferocious. He couldn't accept having his strength questioned. Even though he didn't know what was wrong with this door, he wanted to slice through anything that stood in his way. He gripped his long sword with both hands, and charged forward viciously before bringing it down on the wooden door. When the first muffled sound rang out, Meg looked in the direction of the door in confusion. The restaurant had been soundproofed by the system, and the sound from the outside was almost completely isolated. Even if they were having a heated argument outside, almost no sound could be heard from inside the restaurant. Such a muffled sound indicated that someone was attacking the restaurant's door. Someone seems to be knocking on the door. Is it a guest? Yabamiya also looked in the direction of the door in confusion. It's a knocking sound, not a knocking sound. Sally shook her head slightly, and her gaze became a little wary. If it was a knocking sound, then it meant that the visitor wasn't friendly. Ding! System learning completed. Ding! System notification, an enemy is attacking the restaurant's door. The LV1 restaurant's automatic defense system has been activated. It can defend against any type of attack below level 3. Ding! Host, please deal with the enemy as soon as possible. The defense system can defend against 3 attacks for free. From the 4th time onwards, each attack will be charged a gold coin as a reward. At this moment, the system's notifications rang out continuously. Even though the tone was high, it seemed to be a little tired. System, how's the learning progress? Meg's expression suddenly became a little strange as he asked in his mind. After the system's serious learning, I've completely grasped all the techniques, the system replied seriously. System, didn't you say that the restaurant didn't have any defense system? Why is it suddenly able to defend against attacks below level 3? Meg asked the question in his mind. Chapter 241. That's why you have to work hard to upgrade the restaurant. The restaurant will become your foundation and guarantee in this world. The system's voice was filled with temptation and enthusiasm. Bam! An even louder collision sound came from the direction of the door. Father, is someone here to cause trouble? Amy, who was immersed in the delicious braised chicken, also turned toward the door with a puzzled expression. Who's the enemy? Meg wasn't excited by the system's words. Instead, he raised an eyebrow at the door. Goodnia, the system replied. A cold expression appeared on Mag's face upon hearing that name. He asked, System, do you have a spare door? If you want, I can order one for 20 gold coins, the system replied quickly this time. Very good, your business has come knocking. Meg gently placed his chopsticks on the table with a smile, and said, remove the defenses. Are you sure you want to do this? The restaurant's property could be damaged. The system was a little perplexed. If I recall correctly, according to the rules set by the Grey Temple, residents of Chaos City can retaliate in self-defense when their lives or property are threatened. All consequences will be borne by the invaders. Meg's smile was a little cold as he calmly said, furthermore, whoever damages the restaurant has to pay. Isn't that the restaurant's rule? Rather than doing it yourself, the system suggests that you upgrade as soon as possible so that you can enjoy the high-quality service of sitting comfortably in the restaurant and waving away invaders, the system suggested earnestly. I don't have money. Meg didn't hesitate in the slightest. He turned toward the door with a smile, and said, yes, someone's here to cause trouble. This time, Amy's fireball won't hold back against anyone who dares to damage the restaurant. Yes, yes. If anyone dares to damage the restaurant, Amy definitely won't let them off the hook. Amy nodded earnestly. Then, she glanced at the bowl of rice in front of her, and unhappily said, "Also, they're so annoying. Why do they have to cause trouble when we're eating? Father's braised chicken is so delicious, it's so annoying if I can't continue eating. Do you need my help?" Sally also put down her chopsticks. She wasn't happy to be interrupted in the middle of tasting the food, but her good upbringing prevented her from showing any impatience on her face. She looked at Meg and asked softly, "No need." Before Meg could say anything, Amy raised her little hand and looked at Sally with a serious expression. "Big sister Aisha, let's leave this matter to Amy. I want them to know that Amy can be really fierce when she's angry." "All right." Sally looked at Amy's sincere expression, hesitated for a moment, and then nodded. Anyway, she could just watch from the side. If Amy couldn't handle it, she could just step in. As for Meg, Sally felt that he was a genius chef who could cook the most delicious food in the world. However, if he could even injure himself while fighting a bronze-skinned wild boar, and in the end, he probably had to rely on Amy to barely defeat it, which meant that he was wise not to waste time on cultivation. Perhaps his combat prowess wasn't very strong. Meg didn't stop them. Instead, he looked at the door and waited for them to break in. This level of attack was still far inferior to that of the bronze-skinned wild boar outside Stranglethorn Vale in the morning. Since they couldn't break through the defenses, it meant that the intruders weren't above level 3. Meg didn't believe that they could be more resistant than the bronze-skinned wild boar. At the door, Gabriel took 3 steps back with his knife in hand. He missed a step on the stairs, and only then did he not fall down. His expression was very dark. His second slash landed on the door, but it still didn't leave a single mark. The terrifying force of the rebound from the door made his hands feel a little numb. He can't even cut open the door. Goodnia looked at this scene with shock, and his expression was also a little ugly. He glanced at Gabriel, and it seemed that DeVoe's bragging about how he could even cut down his subordinates when he went crazy wasn't as powerful as he claimed. "Gabriel! You!" DeVoe yelled in annoyance. He had come today to stand up for Goodnia and show off his subordinates' prowess, but he didn't expect that they couldn't even cut open a wooden door. This was a complete loss of face for him. "Shut up." Gabriel turned around and gave DeVoe a cold look. His eyes were a little bloodshot. DeVoe's words were suddenly stuck in his throat. Looking at Gabriel's red eyes, he didn't dare to continue. He knew better than anyone how ruthless Gabriel was. He wasn't just making up stories about him cutting down his subordinates when he went crazy. If he really went crazy, he might even cut him down. "Johnny, you'll sell it with me. This door is a little strange, but it should be enough with you." Gabriel licked his pale lips and clenched the long sword in his hands. He stared at the wooden door, and without waiting for Johnny's reply, he stepped onto the stairs again. Holding the sword with both hands, he slammed it down on the wooden door. Johnny hesitated for a moment before raising the black wand in his hand. He chanted a string of spells, and a red flame lit up at the tip of the wand. It turned into a fireball that flew toward the wooden door. It crashed into the wooden door at almost the same time as Gabriel's sword. Bam! The sound of the fireball exploding and the longsword striking the wooden door coincided perfectly, and the scene of the wooden door being cut open didn't occur. The impenetrable wooden door was now like an ordinary wooden door, and it was torn into shreds by the terrifying power of the longsword and the exploding fireball. "It's open." Expressions of elation appeared on Goudinia's and DeVoe's faces at the same time. They had come here in high spirits to exact revenge, but they didn't think that they'd be stopped by a wooden door. Now that it was open, they were elated. A hint of confusion appeared on Gabriel's and Johnny's faces, but Gabriel still strode through the door with his longsword in hand. Johnny was half a step behind, but he also followed suit. Gabriel swatted away a small piece of wood that had fallen onto his shoulder. His crimson eyes narrowed slightly as he peered into the restaurant through the wood shavings that had yet to dissipate. He had thought that there would be no one in the restaurant, but there was a half-elf little girl with 2 ponytails standing in the middle of the aisle. She didn't even appear to be as tall as the table next to her, and she was currently glaring at them with her hands on her hips. There was also a man and 2 women sitting at the innermost table. There was a plate of food on the table, and it appeared that they were in the middle of a meal. Someone's here. Johnny's gaze also fell upon Meg and the others. When his gaze fell upon Sally, he immediately stopped, and a scorching look appeared in his eyes. He couldn't believe that there was such a beautiful woman in this world. Even if she was an elf, he was going to try and woo her. So there's someone inside. Why didn't you open the door when you heard the noise? A man and 3 women. Are you trying to be a coward? Gabriel tapped his long sword lightly on the ground as his gaze wandered unscrupulously between Yabamiya and Sally. The smile on his pale face was a little frightening. Chapter 242. Amy's words were a little childish, but there was a serious attitude in them. She raised her 2 small hands, and 2 bluish-purple flames suddenly rose. 2 streams of white gas were burned out of the air, and then suddenly collapsed into 2 fist-sized fireballs. Hearing the conversation, Goodnia was a little surprised. There's someone in the restaurant. It's good that there's someone here. Don't worry, Gabriel is the most experienced in dealing with this kind of thing. In a while, I'll make them kneel and kowtow to you to apologize. DeVoe waved his hand dismissively, and his expression became a little excited. Bullying the weak was really an interesting thing. Every time he did it, he would feel an inexplicable sense of excitement. Oh, little brat, do you think you can scare me away with such a small flame? Although I used to be a knight, I, Gabriel, have never had the bullshit principle of not hitting children. If you piss me off, I'll beat you up too. Gabriel looked at the fireballs in Amy's hands with some disdain. She looked at Meg, who was still sitting at the table, and said somewhat mockingly, "You're the owner of this restaurant, aren't you? I heard that you beat up my boss's friend. I'm here to avenge him. Are you going to take this little bastard out on your knees, or do you want me to do it? This fireball." Johnny looked at the small fireballs in Amy's hands, but his eyes slowly widened, and he subconsciously took a step back. Meg looked at Gabriel's scarlet eyes, and his expression was still indifferent, but his hand was already holding a chopstick. "Red-eyed rabbit, I'm not trying to scare you. I'm going to hit you." Amy looked at Gabriel and shook her head seriously. Then, she threw the 2 small fireballs in her hands at the same time and shouted, "Go!" Small fireballs. The 2 small fireballs, only the size of a child's fist, flew toward Gabriel and Johnny. They didn't look fast, but in the blink of an eye, they were in front of the 2 of them. "Ha!" Gabriel laughed somewhat mockingly. She casually raised the long sword in her hand and gently patted it down. This level of fireball was not even a spark. How could a 4-year-old kid know magic? It was just a flame that could be easily extinguished. Ungrateful brats, she would make them suffer. Be careful. Johnny's expression changed drastically. Light flashed from his body, and a red magic barrier appeared. He waved his wand as if he wanted to release some kind of spell, and at the same time, he had already retreated toward the door. However, it was already too late. Bang bang. 2 explosions sounded almost at the same time. As soon as Gabriel's sword touched the fireball exploded. The 100-refined longsword instantly broke, and the terrifying blast of flames blasted him out of the restaurant. He landed on the street outside with a thud. His body was charred black, and he was lying on the ground with horrifying wounds all over his body. White foam came out of his mouth, and his scarlet eyes were filled with unwillingness as he looked in the direction of the restaurant's entrance. At the same time, the other fireball also exploded in front of Johnny. The magic barrier around his body barely held on for a while before it completely disappeared. He didn't even get a chance to chant the spell that he wanted to release. His black wand was reduced to smithereens by the heat wave, and he was also sent flying. He only had time to cast 2 water balls and a frost spell on himself at the last moment. He rolled a few times on the ground in a disheveled state before he knelt down and threw up a mouthful of blood. He supported himself with one hand on the ground, and was already unable to stand up. Many of the tables and chairs in the restaurant had also been flipped over by the terrifying blast of flames. However, the tables, chairs, floor, and walls were miraculously undamaged. It was just that the surface of the restaurant was a mess. So awesome. Yabamiya's mouth gaped open as she looked on with astonishment. She's only 4 years old, but the power of her instantaneous fireball magic is already close to that of a 4th-tier magic caster. Sally was also looking at Amy with astonishment on her face. She suddenly understood why the 2 great magic casters were fighting to take Amy as their disciple. There was probably no other magic caster with such terrifying aptitude on the Norland continent. Gabrielle, Johnny, and I. DeVoe's face immediately paled at the sight of the 2 people flying out of the restaurant. These were the most powerful swordsman and magic caster in his tavern. What had just happened in the restaurant? What was the cause of that terrifying explosion? But no matter what, he knew that they had kicked an iron plate this time. This new restaurant was most likely not as simple as it seemed. DeVoe, let's get out of here right now. That father and daughter are lawless. Goudinia's expression also changed drastically as he patted DeVoe on the shoulder before climbing into his carriage. It's you again. Don't run, bad guy. Have a taste of my little fireball. Amy made her way to the entrance of the restaurant, and glared at Goudnia as he climbed into his carriage. She waved a hand through the air, and a little fireball flew toward the carriage. Be careful. That fireball is extremely powerful. Johnny yelled with all his might. The coachman immediately jumped out of the carriage and rolled into the nearby bushes. DeVoe and Goudnia stared at the fireball with wide eyes, and their thoughts and actions seemed to have been frozen. The fireball passed between the 2 of them before exploding inside the carriage. Boom! Flames rose into the air, and Goudnia and DeVoe, who were standing beside the carriage, were both sent flying. Their clothes were completely destroyed, and they were covered in burns and wounds from the explosion. They lay on the ground and looked at Amy, who was standing in front of Amy's restaurant, with expressions of horror on their faces. Then, they fainted one after another, and it was unknown whether they were dead or alive. Remember, I, Amy, am super fierce. Be good and don't come here to cause trouble in the future. You're really annoying for disturbing my meal. Amy looked at the 4 people who had collapsed in front of her restaurant and said seriously. Little bastard. Gabrielle raised her head to look at Amy, and her fingers slowly reached for the broken sword that had fallen to the side. There was a hint of madness in her crimson eyes. Clatter. One of Mag's shoes stepped on the broken sword. He had no idea when Mag had come out. Meg looked at Amy and said with a smile, Amy, let's go in and eat first. Okay. Amy nodded happily and turned to enter the restaurant. A guy who only dares to hide behind a woman. Gabrielle raised her head and looked at Meg with a deranged expression. You don't deserve the title of a knight. Humility, integrity, compassion, bravery, justice, sacrifice, honor, and soul. You don't have any of the 8 virtues of a knight. Meg didn't become angry because of Gabrielle's words. Instead, he became calmer and looked at her with a hint of mockery and pity. He slowly leaned over and whispered in her ear, "You should respect a true knight. I stand behind her, but I have the courage and determination to die for her. I am Meg Alex." Of course, only a dead man can hear this. Chapter 243. Arg! Murder! The woman's scream pierced the quiet air, and a commotion suddenly came from outside. Cries of surprise rose and fell one after another. The carriage was still burning, and the 4 people lying on the ground outside the restaurant were bleeding profusely, creating a rather gruesome sight. Isn't that Mamie's? What happened? Did someone really die? I think there was a conflict in the restaurant. Looks like Boss is fine, but who died? Boss is fine. It's good that Boss is fine. If something happens to Boss and he can't cook, I'm going to kill those troublemakers. Isn't that good, Nia and DeVoe, those 2 bastards? I told you they'd get their retribution sooner or later. God is right. They came to cause trouble and were beaten to death. They died for nothing. These fellows kicked an iron plate. The 2 consecutive explosions had attracted everyone's attention. They looked at the 4 people lying in pools of blood outside the restaurant, and began to discuss spiritedly among themselves. Some were curious, some were elated, and some were lamenting. This was an alternate world, after all. Even though human life was precious in Chaos City, there were still people dying in the city every day. This was something that even the Grey Temple couldn't completely control, but it wasn't to the extent that everyone was screaming like a sissy. Of course, the Grey Temple naturally wouldn't stand by and do nothing. In Chaos City, the death of a person was always a big deal. A short and hurried whistle sounded, and a few people wearing the Grey Temple's uniform quickly gathered in the direction of Mamie Restaurant. They all wore grave expressions. Meg walked into the restaurant, and his expression was still as calm as ever. However, he was gripping his chopsticks so tightly that his knuckles were slightly pale. Perhaps it was because Meg Alex had killed too many people in the past, so when the chopsticks were plunged into Meg's throat, he wasn't too affected by the fact that it was his first time killing someone. Naturally, even he was a little surprised. If possible, Meg didn't want to kill anyone. Chaos City was still a very peaceful city. If he killed someone, he would be targeted easily. Given his current situation, it wasn't suitable for him to be too high profile. However, the way Gabriel looked at Amy made Meg want to kill him. This was a mad dog with nothing to lose. As long as he was still alive, he could bite anyone at any time. Therefore, he had to die, and he had to die cleanly. It was a good thing for the restaurant to show its claws and teeth. Otherwise, it would be too annoying if all kinds of kittens and puppies came to make trouble. As for Goodnia, DeVoe, and the other 2, they could only be regarded as domestic dogs. After being beaten twice, they knew the taste of pain and didn't dare to make any noise. The higher a person stood, the more wealth he accumulated, the more afraid he would be of losing it, and the more he cherished his life. There was no need to worry too much about such a person. As for killing them all, Meg wasn't stupid enough to do that. The Grey Temple had spent 100 years to maintain order in Chaos City, and its core was to strictly abide by the law. Killing Gabriel, who clearly had a dirty hand, could be said to be self-defense, but if he killed Goodnia and DeVoe, who were waiting outside, he would most likely have to live in the Botai prison. Of course, no matter who wanted to kill Amy, they had to die. Just like what he had said to Gabriel, even though he was standing behind Amy, he was always ready to die for her, and he definitely wouldn't allow anyone to hurt her before he fell. Are you all right? Yabamiya's face paled slightly upon hearing the cries outside. Murder was a serious crime in Chaos City, and regardless of whether it was Amy or Meg who had done it, it would be very difficult for the restaurant to continue operating. Meg might even be arrested. Sally was also looking at Meg with a complex expression. Even though Meg's body blocked her view, what had killed Gabriel was the chopstick that had pierced through his neck, while there was only one chopstick left beside Meg's bowl. Let's continue eating. We still have to clean up the restaurant later. Meg nodded and sat down again. He looked at Amy, who was immersed in the delicious braised chicken, and a gratified smile appeared on his face. As expected, watching Amy eat was the most healing thing. Oh. Yabamiya looked at the smile on Meg's face, and immediately felt a lot more at ease. He hesitated momentarily before sitting down again. Sally glanced at the door before picking up her chopsticks and continuing to eat. Father, this braised chicken is really delicious. Can we continue to eat braised chicken tonight? Amy asked expectantly as she ate. If you like it, of course. Meg nodded with a smile. He put a few pieces of chicken in his bowl into Amy's bowl, and patted Amy's head. Father is the best, Amy said happily as she rubbed her head against Meg's hand. The atmosphere in the restaurant relaxed because of Amy's smile. Amy still didn't know what was going on outside, and Meg wasn't going to let her know, either. Captain, it seems to be that restaurant again this time. Which idiot dares to come here and cause trouble? A thin young man beside Barzil ran toward Amy's with a strange expression. Check the injured and see if they're dead. Don't be in a hurry to arrest them. Inform the Metropolitan Police Department to come over and assess the situation first before making a decision. Barzil's expression was a little ugly. He glanced at Julian, who had pulled out a deck chair and was playing with the two birds hanging by the door. He added, Monkey, you go and inform Sir Brandley about this. Yes, sir. The young man called Monkey answered and ran toward the two people lying beside the carriage. He put his finger under Goudinia's and Devoe's nostrils, and couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Although they were weak, they were still alive. Their bodies were covered with burns and wounds caused by the explosion. It looked a little scary, but as long as they weren't dead, it was just an ordinary first-class incident. Monkey, a third-class incident. Report. Barzil stood beside Gabriel's body and frowned when he saw the chopstick sticking out of Gabriel's neck. The thing he didn't want to happen the most had happened. Yes, sir. Monkey's expression changed, and he quickly ran over. A third-class incident meant that not only did someone die, but it was also not an ordinary person. Captain. 5 people from the Metropolitan Police Department rushed over and looked at the scene, waiting for Barzil's orders. Keep an eye on him. Bob, treat the injured first. The rest of you, follow me. Barzil pointed at Johnny, but his sharp eyes were fixed on Meg, who was eating in the restaurant. He walked toward the restaurant. Chapter 244. Meg put down his bowl of rice and smiled at Amy as he said, Amy, if you're done eating, take Ugly Duckling upstairs to play for a while. Take it upstairs for dinner tonight. That little plate in the room outside is its food for tonight. Did Father prepare it for me? Amy's eyes lit up. Yes. Meg nodded. Okay. Amy nodded happily before licking her empty braised chicken casserole bowl. She then picked up Ugly Duckling from the counter and carried it upstairs as she said, Ugly Duckling, it looks like you won't be able to eat the super delicious braised chicken for lunch today. Let's go see what Father has prepared for you. Meg followed Amy to the corner of the counter, then looked up at Basil. He stood up and nodded. You're here. You should know why we're here. Bazer's sharp gaze was like that of an eagle's as he stared into Mag's eyes. For a person to be able to eat so calmly after killing someone without showing any fear, there was only one possibility: he had killed many people. Basil had been a member of the Grey Temple for 20 years, and had caught many murderers with his own hands. However, none of them could be as calm as Meg. There was no fear, nor was there any perverted excitement. He was so calm that it was as if he had just done something insignificant. Meg glanced at the silver embroidery of the word "Patrol" on Bazer's chest. The patrol team that patrolled the Aden Square arrived first, and they looked into Bazer's eyes without any intention of avoiding his gaze. He nodded and said, "This happened in my restaurant, so I'll cooperate with the Grey Temple's investigation." As the governing body of Chaos City, the Grey Temple had the Patrol Department, the Garrison Department, and the City Inspector Department. They were responsible for daily security, food, city defense, and punishment. Their uniforms were similar to those of the Imperial Secret Service. They were gray robes, black pants, and no fancy flying fish. There were only 4 magic balls with comet-like tails on their backs that formed a ring. That was the symbol of the Grey Temple. The words embroidered on their chests indicated which department they belonged to. They wore black leather boots, and had standard long swords at their waists. The magic casters wore gray robes, and there was no requirement for wands. Basil nodded, and looked at Mag with a serious expression as he said, "The victim was a knight, so this incident has been upgraded to a 3rd Tier 1. I hope you can tell us the truth about what happened. Everything you say will be recorded, and it will be used as an addendum." As you can see, the restaurant was closed for the day. My employees and my daughter and I were eating in the locked restaurant. In the middle of the meal, someone smashed the restaurant's door with a sword and a magic caster. A sword-wielding criminal and a magic caster rushed into the restaurant, and while they were smashing the restaurant, they threatened my safety. My daughter, Amy, cast 2 magic fireballs in self-defense, and knocked them out of the restaurant. Then, she discovered that the 2 criminal leaders were trying to use the carriage to attack the restaurant. In a moment of fear, she also threw a fireball at them. Meg pointed at the door, and nodded. That's what happened. Murder is not a small matter in Chaos City. Basil's eyes narrowed slightly upon hearing this. Mag's explanation was very concise, but he was able to explain the entire situation in a very clear and organized manner. In just a few simple sentences, he was able to shift the blame from him to that little girl. He didn't comment on the power of the fireball, but the fatal injury of the guy who died at the door was not caused by the fireball. Meg didn't mention that chopstick at all. That kind of excuse wouldn't get through. What's the big deal about killing a person? A hoarse voice sounded from outside the door. Big deal. That's nothing. A despicable voice yelled out smugly. How dare you? Who? An inspector shouted with a stern face. He turned around and saw Julian standing at the door with a birdcage. His expression changed, and he swallowed the rest of his words. Basil had repeatedly warned him not to provoke this hunchback. Who's the big deal? Charcoal poked his head out of the birdcage, and glared at the inspector provocatively. I. The inspector looked at the featherless black crow, and was so angry that he gripped the long sword at his waist. However, he didn't dare to pull it out when he thought of the frost dragon dancing in the sky. Good that I know it's you. Charcoal retracted his head with satisfaction. Murder is a big deal in Chaos City. This is the rule of the Grey Temple, Basil said seriously. Baser turned to Urian with a serious expression. He was only a 5th tier knight, but he had no intention of backing down. The rules of the Grey Temple were unquestionable in Chaos City. You can let Roland say that to me. I'm an old man, and I hate rules the most in my life. If you want to bind me with rules, I'll be interested in destroying them. Julian's smile became more and more cruel, and the air seemed to become colder all of a sudden. Basil's expression changed slightly, but he had already gripped the long sword at his waist. He wasn't afraid of sacrifice and death in order to protect the Great Temple and the honor of the knights. The Lord asked me to send his regards to you, Master Julian. He said that he'd like to have a cup of tea with you after he's done with the Great Temple. Right at this moment, Branley's panting voice sounded, and he quickly walked in between Basil and Julian. He looked at Julian with a smile, and waved his hand behind his back, indicating for Basil to step back. You're going to be very busy this year, aren't you? Julian said with a mocking smile. There are indeed a lot of things to do in the Great Temple recently, but no matter how busy I am, I'm sure it'll be over soon. What brings you here? A drop of sweat slid down Branley's cheek, and his smile was a little forced. What the hell was going on? He was already an old man, and he had to deal with this every day. He had thought that he would come to the Aiden Square for a meal with Julian since he didn't have anything to do today, but who would have thought that something would happen to Amy's? Thankfully, he had arrived just in time. Julian's temper was notoriously unpredictable, and if he were to suddenly fly into a rage, a single spell would be enough to kill everyone here. Oh, it's nothing. I just heard that someone was trying to kill my dear disciple, so I came to see who it was. If he's still alive, I'll give him the final blow. Julian shook his head with a cold smile, and his voice was so cold that it could freeze one's bones. Basil and the others all took a step back reflexively, and their expressions changed slightly. They suddenly had a feeling that if it had been Julian who had attacked Amy, the 4 people outside would have all been dead by now. Little Amy is such a prodigy, so it's only natural that someone would try to kill her. Branley suddenly understood why Julian was so angry. Monkey had just told him that someone had died at Amy's, and it turned out that the boss's daughter had something to do with it. Chapter 245. Branley's expression immediately fell upon hearing that voice. Julian was already giving him a headache, and now Crassus was here as well. After taking in the same disciple, the Lord of Ice and Lord of Fire would most likely not be able to face off against each other in the near future. However, if they were to side with one another, then no one would be able to withstand it. Branley turned to Crassus with a smile, and said, Master Crassus, little Amy is completely fine. We still can't determine whether that person intended to kill her or not. According to the Great Temple's procedures, we have to first understand the case, then verify the truth based on the testimonies of both parties. That's the only way to resolve this issue. As someone who had grown up listening to the legends of the 2 great magic casters, Branley's aura naturally paled in comparison. However, as a deacon of the Great Temple, he definitely couldn't allow anyone to interfere with the investigation of a 3rd-tier case, even if the other party was a 10th-tier magic caster. Law was the foundation of Chaos City, and the Great Temple and the City Lord's castle were both very resolute in that regard. No matter who the culprit was, they had the courage and determination to fight back. You guys continue, I'll keep an eye on things. However, it doesn't matter whose testimonies it is, I only believe what Amy says. Crassus entered the room, and took a glance at Julian. This time, he didn't display too much hostility. Amy is right, Julian chimed in a raspy voice. It was rare for him to agree with Julian. Our Great Temple will handle this matter impartially. Branley's smile was a little forced. He was already cursing Gabriel to death many times in his heart. How dare he come to Amy's to cause trouble, and even try to attack Amy? Did he have a death wish? Baser, tell us the situation first, Branley said to Baser. Baser was a little uncomfortable with the pressure that Crassus and Julian were exerting on him, but the 2 of them were powerful enough that even the Lord of the Great Temple would have to treat them with respect. Thus, he recounted the situation that Meg had told him. Branley's expression didn't look too good after hearing Baser's description. The people outside really didn't know what they were doing, but what was their motive? Was the truth really like what Meg said? He was not in a hurry to come to a conclusion. He turned to look at Meg and asked, "Mr. Mac, do you have anything else to add? If not, we'll question the others next." "Teacher Crassus, Teacher Julian." Meg greeted Crassus and Julian with a nod. He was very grateful for their unconditional support. This matter could be big or small, but it could be resolved as long as the Great Temple didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Of course, even if they weren't present, Meg wasn't panicked. He shook his head and said, "That's what happened. I have nothing to add." However, according to the 18th law of Chaos City, which was jointly promulgated by the City Lord's Castle and the Great Temple, residents are allowed to retaliate in self-defense when their lives or property are threatened. At the same time, my private property was invaded when the restaurant was closed. According to the 23rd law of Chaos City, I can expel the invaders through any means, and I won't be held responsible. A swordsman and a sorcerer forcefully broke the door that was locked from the inside and entered the restaurant with their swords. For a restaurant with only one chef, 2 waitresses, and a little girl, wouldn't that constitute an invasion and fatal threat? Meg paused momentarily, and looked at Brandley with a serious expression as he asked, "Am I right to say that?" The restaurant instantly fell silent. Barzil and the other patrol officers were all looking at Meg in a different light. They had thought that Meg was going to push all the blame onto Amy, and then invite Crassus and Julian here to use them to pressure the Great Temple. However, they didn't think that after the arrival of Crassus and Julian, Meg would stop emphasizing that Amy was the culprit. Instead, he brought up 2 laws of Chaos City that corresponded to this incident. Once these 2 laws were established, there was no point in arguing over who was the culprit. Just as Meg had said, he could expel the invaders through any means. This was a right granted to all residents by the Great Temple and the City Lord's Castle. Meticulous thinking, straight to the point. That was the first thought that came to the minds of the patrol officers as they looked at Meg. If he were a criminal, then he would definitely be a difficult one to deal with. However, the situation was the exact opposite. He wasn't a criminal. Instead, he was a good citizen who had picked up the sword of Chaos City's laws and rebelled against the invaders. Be kind to the weak, fight against violence bravely, and never hurt any woman. These were all vows that he had made when he became a knight. The man who had broken into the restaurant with a sword and tried to attack a defenseless little girl clearly didn't deserve to be called a knight. He could only be considered a scum. Judging from the fragments of the wooden door, it was struck by a sharp sword and a bursting flame spell at the same time. Both were full-power 3rd-tier attacks. If he just wanted to enter the restaurant, he wouldn't have needed to use such a powerful attack. The broken sword was unsheathed, and the scabbard wasn't damaged. "This means that he entered the restaurant with his sword drawn," Baser said. He looked at Meg with a hint of admiration in his eyes. Being as calm as water after killing someone was not only a murderous act, but also when someone was determined to die. This was because he had already disregarded his own life. If Meg was trying to protect his daughter, Baser felt that this was very likely to be the case based on how much he doted on his daughter. Although he was only a chef, Baser still admired his bravery and fearlessness. After all, even a true knight wouldn't necessarily be able to do this. "Yes, you're right." Brandley nodded. He couldn't help but raise his voice a few octaves. This was the truth. This was great. The situation he was most worried about was that Meg would kill someone for no reason, and Crassus and Julian would insist on protecting him. If that happened, both sides would be in a stalemate, and the situation would very likely get out of hand. However, things were different now. No matter what their goal was, a 3rd-tier knight and a 3rd-tier magic caster had broken into the restaurant with all their might. This was already considered trespassing and threatening the safety of the residents. All of Meg and Amy's actions met the criteria of self-defense. Therefore, they were innocent. Everyone present had an answer in their hearts. Gray. Gray Temple. They're trying to kill us. You have to help us. Help. They're going to kill us. That little girl is going to kill us. She's going to burn us to death. Chapter 246. The restaurant suddenly became quiet. Hearing the complaints of Gourmet and DeVoe outside, anger began to accumulate on everyone's faces. This was probably the guilty party cries out the victim first. How dare these two try to twist the truth at a time like this? Do they think our Grey Temple is a pushover? Brandley was fuming with rage as he strode out of the restaurant. Barzil and the others also followed along with thunderous expressions. A third-tier swordsman and a third-tier magic caster had attacked a shop in the Aiden Square in broad daylight. This was a blatant disregard for the authority of the Grey Temple, as well as the inspection office. Mr. Mac, was this really done by Amy? Crassus wasn't in a hurry to leave. Instead, he turned to Meg and asked in a quiet voice. If you're talking about a fireball, then it was indeed done by Amy. Weren't you the one who taught her how to use an exploding fireball? Meg turned to Crassus with a peculiar look on his face. Amy had gone to class the day before, and this morning, she had used an exploding fireball against the bronze wild boar. Meg had thought that Crassus had taught her how to use it the day before. I only briefly explained the principles of the flame blast spell to her yesterday, and I was planning to teach it to her today. Could it be that she learned it herself? Crassus' eyes widened with surprise, but more than that, he was elated. There's no need to talk about my disciple's aptitude. It's just a flame blast spell, so what's there to be surprised about? Wait until she summons a frost dragon in a few days. Julian pursed his lips as he strode toward the door. He was also unable to conceal the elation in his eyes as he murmured to himself, "Little Amy is extremely talented in fire magic, but I wonder how talented she is in ice magic. Fire and ice don't mix. I think Amy will give up on ice magic soon." Fire magic casters are the best at melee combat, Crassus retorted as he followed Julian out of the restaurant. System, customize a door, but don't install it right away, I'll do it later. Meg made his way out of the restaurant with a calm expression. Things were progressing more smoothly than he had anticipated. Ding! 20 gold coins have been successfully deducted. Customizing the restaurant door. The system's voice sounded. It was rare that it was not wrangling. Mr. Mac, you're amazing. Yabamia looked at Mag's departing figure with a look of reverence on her face. She had thought that this was going to be a very bad situation, but Mag had easily resolved it with just a few words. Nothing had happened to the restaurant, but it was the people outside who were in trouble. He's very calm and meticulous. He must have thought everything through before he attacked, right? Sally looked at Mag's departing figure with a hint of approval in her eyes. Although Sally didn't like killing people, the guy in front of her was too disgusting. Sally also sensed a lot of evil aura from him, and even a bit of undead aura. This meant that he was definitely not a good person, and his hands were stained with the lives of innocent people. Sally also saw the crazed look in his eyes when he looked at Amy. That was most likely why Meg had tried to kill him. Sally didn't feel anything against Meg killing this guy. On her way to Chaos City, she had also killed a group of bandits who had slaughtered an elven village, and all of them had been killed by her arrows. Gourmet and DeVoe had just woken up after being treated by the magic caster named Bob. Their wounds had already stopped bleeding, and a thin layer of scabs had formed over their bodies. Their mental states were slightly better, but that was all that a third-tier magic caster could do. "We were only here to eat, but we were severely injured by that brat before we even entered the restaurant. You have to arrest her." Goudinia's face was filled with horror. This was the first time he had been so close to death. When the fireball exploded next to his ear, he thought that death was already upon him. And that boss, he must have ordered that kid to do this. Gabriel is dead, he's dead. Didn't the Grey Temple say that they would protect us? Hurry up and arrest them. Protect me. DeVoe's expression was also similar. Deep fear had enveloped his heart. Even though he liked to see others being dominated by fear, he knew that it didn't feel good to be dominated by it himself. When wealth and status couldn't give him a sense of security, his life could also be easily threatened. DeVoe looked at the dead Gabriel lying in a pool of his own blood, and swore to himself that he would never come to this corner of the Aiden Square again. The Grey Temple was like a life-saving straw that the two of them were desperately trying to grasp onto. It gave them a sense of security, and they knew that the Grey Temple definitely wouldn't let them be killed. The Grey Temple will protect all citizens who abide by the law of the land, not bullies. Are you still trying to twist the truth? Brandley made his way out of the restaurant, and turned to Goudnia and DeVoe with a cold expression. Goudnia and DeVoe's expressions immediately changed upon hearing this. They didn't know what had just happened in the restaurant, but if that was the case, then it would be very difficult for them to get out of here alive. Master Brandley, I am the owner of DeVoe's Tavern and a board member of the Aiden Chamber of Commerce. We've met at a banquet held by the Chamber of Commerce not long ago. DeVoe forced a fawning smile onto his face as he tried to worm his way into being friends with Brandley. Even if you're the president of the Aiden Chamber of Commerce, you'll still be severely punished by the law for what you did today. Brandley's expression remained unchanged as he looked at DeVoe through narrowed eyes. Also, I've met many people in Chaos City. I'm innocent. We're just customers who came here to eat, and we didn't do anything. Goudnia was on the verge of a mental breakdown. He had wanted the Grey Temple to back them up, but it appeared that the Grey Temple was on Meg's side now. Look, Master. Right at this moment, Barzil suddenly strode over to Gabriel's body, and pushed it over to reveal a black iron cross. That's a black iron cross. Everyone from the Grey Temple looked at the 5-centimeter-tall iron cross, and their expressions changed drastically. They then turned to Gabriel's body with rage and disgust in their eyes. What's that? Brandley asked in a perplexed manner. Meg was also looking at the iron cross with a curious expression. It seemed to have been cut from a sheet of black iron, and judging from the expressions of everyone from the Grey Temple, it seemed to be of some extraordinary origin. Not long ago, there were 3 cases of torture and murder in Chaos City. 2 of the victims were children who were less than 10 years old. Their bodies were dismembered in an extremely cruel manner, and a black iron cross was left behind at the crime scenes. Barzil picked up the black iron cross from the ground, and said in a cold voice, "It's exactly the same as this one, it's a 4th-tier incident." Chapter 247. So you're saying that there's a very good chance that this person is the perpetrator of those 3 brutal murders. Brandley's expression changed slightly upon hearing this, but his brows then furrowed as he said, but even though the victims were all ordinary people, they should have been treated as 3rd-tier incidents at most. How did they become 4th-tier incidents? 3 years ago, there was a massacre in Chaos City. A family of 4 was tortured to death. The male head of the family was a deputy invigilator of the night test, a 4th-tier knight. He had just been promoted to head invigilator that day. After attending a celebration party, he came home drunk. The female head of the family and 2 children under the age of 10 were tortured to death. Only a black cross was left at the scene. Barzil clenched his fists with a dark expression as he looked at Gabriel's body, and gritted his teeth as he said, judging from the black cross and the method of murder left behind at the scene, these 2 cases were connected by the same person. Gabriel. Serial murders. DeVoe stared at Gabriel's body with horror etched on his face. No matter what the result was, there was no way that he would be able to escape unscathed. After running the tavern for so many years, he had a lot of dirty hands. If he were to be investigated, he would be spending the rest of his life in the Bowtie prison. How is this possible? Goudinia's face was also filled with shock and horror as he stumbled back a couple of steps. He had only come here to make Mag apologize to him, but now, even a fourth-tier incident had been dragged into this. If he were to be dragged into this, he would at least be in serious trouble, if not dead. Take the body back and make sure it's safe. Branley's expression had also become extremely grave as he turned to DeVoe and Goudinia with a cold expression, and said, "Take the three of them back to the Bowtie prison and interrogate them to see if this is a gang crime." Yes. The members of the patrol office responded and took out ropes to tie up DeVoe, Goudinia, and Johnny. Right at this moment, a team of 6 members of the Grey Temple arrived on horseback. Each of them had a silver character embroidered on their chests, and the leader of the team cupped his fist in a salute toward Branley as he reported, "Master Branley, we're from the Metropolitan Police. We've received a third-tier incident report. You're just in time. All of you, take the body back and let the forensic doctor examine it." "It's a fourth-tier suspect," Branley interrupted. "Yes." The man was stunned for a moment, but when his eyes fell on the black cross in Bazer's hand, his expression suddenly became serious. Someone took out a simple stretcher from the horse's back and covered the corpse with a layer of white cloth. After that, the guards left directly. "I'm innocent, my lord. He was wrongly accused. We are all good citizens, good citizens. That black cross must belong to the owner of the restaurant. He must have framed us." DeVoe, who was pulled up, came back to his senses and yelled at the top of his lungs. Bazer walked over with a cold face and kicked DeVoe's lower abdomen with his knee. With a muffled sound, DeVoe slowly squatted down with his hands covering his stomach. His eyes were wide open, and his mouth was wide open. Tears were flowing out, and he was in so much pain that he could not speak. "Bob, shut them up and take them back," Bazer said coldly. "Yes." The magic caster beside him hurriedly replied. This was the first time that he had seen Bazer lose control of his emotions like this. He raised his wand and chanted a few incantations, and 2 moss-like green things were plastered to the mouths of DeVoe and Goudinia. The 3 of them then left with the guards. Goudinia struggled with all his might, and turned to look in the direction of Amy's. He saw Meg standing at the entrance of the restaurant with a calm expression, and he suddenly regretted messing with this terrifying man. "Watch where you're going." Monkey, who was holding him up, elbowed him in the face without leaving a trace. His expression was similarly cold. "Monkey, why did Boss have such a big reaction today?" Bob followed along behind Monkey with a perplexed look. "That night examiner is Boss' best friend. On the night of the incident, the 2 of them had a second round of drinking." Monkey's voice was a little low. He stopped and turned around to look at Bob, whose mouth was agape, and warned, "Don't mention this in front of Boss." "Understood." Bob nodded seriously, and didn't say anything else. Branley turned to Meg with a serious expression, and said, "On behalf of the Grey Temple, I'd like to express my gratitude to Mr. Mack and Amy for their contributions in subduing the criminals. Once we find out that he's the murderer, the Grey Temple will also offer the rewards for both cases as a reward." "You're welcome." Mag hurriedly waved his hands. This sudden turn of events had also stunned him. He was still thinking about how to get out of this incident safely, but he had suddenly become a great hero who got rid of evil and brought peace to the people, and he was even going to receive a reward. Furthermore, after hearing Bazer's words, the knot in his heart had completely disappeared. Stabbing that chopstick into Gabriel's throat was the right thing to do. Gabriel was indeed a rabid dog, a rabid dog that had eaten people before. Thank you. Their family of 4 can rest in peace now. Baser stepped forward and extended his hand to Meg. He looked into his eyes and said sincerely, I'm Baser. If there's a chance, I'd like to have a drink with you. I've quit drinking recently, but you're welcome to dine in the restaurant. Meg shook his hand. Baser seemed to know the family of 4 that had been killed, but Meg didn't ask too much. I told you that Amy was always right. Her eyes could tell the difference between good and evil, and she knew when to hold back, Crassus said with a smile, and his tone was full of pride. If I were to teach her for a day, those 2 brats would be dead in one move. Julian pursed his lips. Both of you are right. This was an emergency, and I had to rush back to the Grey Temple to help out. Please forgive me for any inconvenience caused, Branley said with a smile. He then turned to Meg and said, Mr. Mack, please thank Amy for me, I heard that. I don't know what you're thanking me for, but you're welcome. Amy's voice sounded from behind him. Meg turned around to find Amy holding Ugly Duckling in one arm while stuffing some dried fish into her mouth with the other. Her little hand and expression immediately stiffened at the sight of Meg, and it was as if she had been caught doing something bad. She slowly removed the half-eaten dried fish from her mouth, and handed it to Ugly Duckling, who was wearing an aggrieved expression. Meow. Ugly Duckling meowed at Meg with an aggrieved expression. I'm praising Amy for defeating a big bad guy today. Well done, Meg said with a smile. As expected, it wasn't very reliable to let Amy feed the cat herself. Really? Amy's eyes immediately lit up. Yes, Amy is a little hero. Bramley nodded with a smile. He then nodded at Meg before getting onto a horse-drawn carriage with Baser. Chapter 248. If Teacher Crassus hasn't eaten yet, then of course I'll cook for you. Meg smiled. He then turned to Julian and asked, Teacher Julian, would you like one as well? Julian hesitated for a moment before asking, is that okay? Of course. Just treat it as a tasting for a new product, but only a new product. Meg nodded with a smile. Then I'll have one as well. Julian nodded before also entering the restaurant with the birdcage in his hand. Hello, Master Halfbeard and Master Turtle. Amy greeted the two of them. She and Ugly Duckling both stared at the birdcage in Julian's hands with astonishment on their faces. You've changed, Black Coal. I didn't think that you two would still be able to find out even though I've hidden it so well. I've become even more handsome. I've sinned. Black Coal heaved a forlorn sigh as he raised his head with a forlorn expression. Amy shook her head as she pointed at Black Coal with a serious expression and said, No, Black Coal. You've grown fur and become even darker. Charcoal lowered his head to take a look and immediately jumped up. He cried out in exaggerated surprise, Your Highness, royal robes are finally growing back. As expected, one must bear the weight of the crown if they wish to wear it. This must have been a test for me, and Your Highness has finally endured it. Meg wasn't in a hurry to enter the restaurant. Instead, he turned to Sally, who was also standing at the entrance, and asked, Aisha, can you help me put out the fire and clean up the bloodstains at the entrance of the restaurant? All right. Sally nodded before unleashing a first-tier water ball spell onto the burning horse-drawn carriage, putting out the fire instantly. She then unleashed 2 water-type spells to clean up the bloodstains at the entrance of the restaurant. The stench of blood instantly disappeared, and the ground became extremely clean as if nothing had happened. Boss, can we clean up the restaurant now? Yabamiya asked Meg. Yes, it's done. Meg looked at the mess in the restaurant and nodded with a smile. Since that guy was a vicious murderer, there was no problem at all. He turned around and entered the restaurant. He wrote a new notice and pasted it next to the doorpost. He changed the wording. The restaurant was smashed by a murderer and is in the process of emergency recovery. It will be closed for the day and a new product will be released tomorrow. Did you see that? The Grey Temple didn't capture the restaurant owner. Yeah, one of the troublemakers died. I didn't expect that all the people who were arrested were troublemakers, but the restaurant owner is fine. What's so strange about that? If you don't have the ability to cause trouble, you deserve to be beaten to death. This is the rule set by the Grey Temple and the City Lord's castle. That's true, but not everyone can solve it so easily. I think there must be someone behind this boss. Otherwise, with such a big thing happening, he would have been taken away at least for today. The restaurant would have to close for a while. All of the onlookers began to discuss spiritedly among themselves upon seeing this. They were all speculating who Meg's backer was. Even something like this could be resolved so easily. Crassus and Julian turned to look at Sally at the same time. They looked at each other before looking away and sitting down in their usual seats. Black Coal's birdcage had already been placed on the ground by Amy, and she was staring at it from both sides. Meow, Ugly Duckling opened its mouth and meowed at Black Coal. It poked at the birdcage with its little paws, trying to reach through the gaps to grab Black Coal. Unfortunately, its legs were too short, and it couldn't reach Black Coal at all. Black Coal looked at Ugly Duckling with a disdainful expression, and said, "Humph, look at you. You want to touch me?" Meow. Ugly Duckling immediately refused to back down. It shook the cage with its little paws, looking as if it were going to open the cage and fight Black Coal. "Come here." Black Coal hollered at Ugly Duckling proudly from inside the cage. "Is this the door of the cage?" Amy suddenly asked curiously as she pointed at the small door at the side. "Master Amy, I don't think this is a door. Why don't we talk about something happier, like singing?" Black Coal's voice suddenly became ingratiating. "No, Black Coal, your singing is terrible. I don't want to hear it. I want to see you fight with Ugly Duckling." Amy shook her head. She reached out with her little hand and tried to pry open the door bolt with some effort. Ugly Duckling also ran over with an eager expression. "Then we can talk about dancing. I'm actually the little prince of dancing. As long as it's a dance you can name, I can dance." Black Coal's voice was filled with despair. "I don't want to see a bird with eyebrows dance." Amy still shook her head. She lowered her head and studied it seriously for a while. Suddenly, her eyes lit up, and she pressed the door bolt lightly. With a soft click, the door bolt popped out by itself. "Master! I'm a bird. Why do I have to fight with a stupid cat? This isn't fair." Ugly Duckling yelled in despair as it stretched out its neck and bit the door with its mouth. Meow. Ugly Duckling grabbed the door with its paws excitedly and slowly pulled it outward, preparing to enter the cage and fight with that annoying bird. "Why don't we talk about why this stupid cat got fatter?" Black Coal's voice was filled with despair. Patter. Amy pressed her hand on the door, and the door that was about to be opened by Ugly Duckling closed again. The door bolt locked itself automatically. She nodded and pointed at Ugly Duckling and said, "Right? Do you also think Ugly Duckling got fatter?" "Yes, it got fatter." Black Coal heaved a sigh of relief. He hurriedly nodded in agreement, and said, "And it's not just a little fat, it's very fat. If it continues to get fatter, you won't be able to carry it in a while." "Did you hear that, Ugly Duckling? I'm not the only one saying that you've gotten fatter. Everyone can see that. So, you have to run 10 laps around the restaurant before you go to bed tonight, and you're not allowed to eat anything at night." Amy looked at Ugly Duckling with a serious expression. Then, she pulled out a piece of dried fish from somewhere and put it into her mouth. She took a bite, and began to eat happily. Meow, Ugly Duckling looked up at Amy with an aggrieved expression, and its sapphire blue eyes were watery. Not only did she have to run, she even stole my dinner, and she called me fat. Meg walked out of the kitchen with 2 bowls of braised chicken and rice. He looked at Amy, who was eating dried fish while lecturing Ugly Duckling with a serious expression, and a smile appeared on his face. Amy didn't know about the murder, and he wasn't going to let her know. He put down the 2 bowls of braised chicken and rice with a smile, and said, "Teachers, this is the new dish that the restaurant is going to release, braised chicken and rice. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.